some of y'all had a late night last night, so thank you for being here without much sleep. Anyway, Mr. Manager, would you like to start?
Yep, I'll get us going. Vice Mayor. All right, so Mayor, members of council, and Vice Mayor. So City Council recently directed staff to engage diverse stakeholders on the matter of plastic bags and its impact on the environment, alternatives to its use, and other pertinent matters. The city brought along Dr. Mary Jo Richard, who worked with staff, council members Branch and Henley, on the content development and questions for the community engagement process. Council members Henley and Branch requested this presentation to provide council an update on the engagement findings to date, ahead of when the plastic bag fee comes to you all in September for your consideration. Dr. Richard.
Thank you so much. As was just said, on July 5th, the staff from the OPA presented the first phases of refreshing the 2013 sustainability plan. And that same night, the City of Virginia Beach City Council directed the city manager and his staff to develop a plan for an enhanced education and engagement following the public hearing on considering a plastic bag fee for Virginia Beach. And Councilmember Henley and Councilmember Branch volunteered to serve as the liaisons. And so my role in this initiative was simply to listen. So the process that we engaged in, we did 3 listening sessions. The first was with the retail industry representatives. The second was with environmental advocacy representatives. And the third was with various community representatives and interest stakeholders around the community. And we used 12 questions using the C format, social, economic, and environmental lenses. And we're going to walk through the findings for each one of those. I'm going to take my time and make sure, my commitment is to make sure that the key concerns for each one of these sessions is heard and adequately represented. So the first lens that we're going to look through is the social elements to consider. And in the first section, the social concerns for the retail food industry were primarily flexibility and collaboration. They have a large number of initiatives that they're voluntarily pursuing with benchmarks that include 2025 deadline to eliminate the use of plastic shopping bags in a large number of the grocery stores in the city of Virginia Beach, but a lot of other ones. All of them are included in the report, in the attachments. But their big concern is that they have flexibility and the ability to collaborate on the local level because with the volatility of the markets right now and the nuanced needs and vulnerabilities of each organization, they really want to be able to have that ability to pivot. And so that's the primary social concern for the first session. The second session, the environmental advocacy concern was that really this local legislation for the bag fee is the first step in significant long-term behavioral change. It's not seen as a silver bullet, but it's seen as a way to start making it easy for the local constituents to make a change in the way that they shop and the way that they get bags. And so they're not seeing it as the full-scale approach, the silver bullet, but rather to start helping individuals and different populations to be aware of the options to refuse when they can, and only have the people that do not choose to do something different to be paying for that bag fee. And then the social concern, primary social concern, in the third group, which was the largest group, we had 27 participants in that group, was the urgency of the situation. Everyone in that room, despite how incredibly vast the spectrum was in the types and the nature of the interest groups that were represented, all of them said that this was an urgent need that needed to be addressed. They did not agree on the approach, but they really all agreed that it was urgent, and they wanted to make sure that whatever was done was included social equity, that it did not bear an a reasonable burden on people that were already vulnerable, including vulnerable populations as well as small businesses. So the economic primary concerns for the food retail industry was logistical and financial strain that could potentially be experienced by the retailers if the local bag fee were implemented. They talked about a patchwork approach. One of them described it as a whack-a-mole approach, where location by location, it made it very difficult for people to, especially independent grocers, if they have multiple locations in different cities, to be able to have to recalibrate their point of sale by location. And so it was a financial strain. And that way it was also a financial strain because if people lived in border cities and one store had the bag fee and the store a few blocks away but in another town did not, and their expectation was to have the same shopping experience everywhere, that they would opt to go where they don't have to pay for the bags. And so it could potentially pull money from the city of Virginia Beach. And then finally, the economic strain could be the cost of any alternative single-use bag. The only one really that's considerable is the paper bag. And the paper bag is excessively expensive. It's a lot bulkier, and it causes a lot more cost to the single-use bag, and so it would pass that cost down to the employee. So those are the primary economic concerns for the retailers. The environmental advocates really focused on the reality that, number one, the localities all over the state of Virginia have already implemented similar bag fees, and they have figured out protocols to address the concerns that were described by the retailers. And additionally, that mindful implementation was the key, that any concerns, economic concerns of the individual, the tax that it could take, the toll that it could take on individuals and vulnerable populations, as well as the toll that it could take on businesses, could actually be augmented by the fee itself. That the infrastructures that needed to be put in place and the cost that would be incurred by the populations and the industries would be augmented by the fee. And so the other thing that mindful implementation could do is they used a number of case studies that were examples of cities that are a little further along than the city of Virginia Beach would be. And these cities, instead of just saying today is the day that we start the bag fee, they had a several month lead up where they did aggressive education and also targeted the areas of the city that had vulnerable populations, and they fronted funds to purchase multi-use bags, and they did aggressive bag distributions to those vulnerable populations and the harder to reach populations, along with a concerted effort in collaboration with some grocery stores, some community groups, libraries, different places like that, to have distribution centers, aggressive distribution centers. So by the time the fee was implemented, it was not, there was not a big outcry by the public because they had done that mindful implementation. So that was the primary focus of the economic elements in the second session. In the final session, again, we had a broad spectrum of interests there, but the big concern shared by all was that the cost burden, whatever the decision was that was made, that the cost burden would not be unduly placed on vulnerable populations or the businesses, that there would be a way to alleviate or address that cost burden. And so they would be, the various groups said, we'll be in support if it doesn't hurt, basically, if it doesn't hurt the people that are already feeling the strain of the economy, whether you're talking about businesses or individuals. And the third of the C, the environmental elements to consider. The grocery store, the retail food industry really looked at focusing on statewide rather than locality by locality legislation. They're in strong support of legislation. They just say that logistically and financially, it puts a heavy weight, a heavy burden on the organizations to have to implement city by city. And so they were very clear that they're working with the state legislators to push through environmental sustainability legislation so that they can implement universally rather than patchwork approach. And so that was the other environmental element that they talked about is they said if the plastic bags are eliminated, and again, they did stress that by 2025, their plan is to, majority of them in our city are planning to have no more single-use plastic grocery bags by the year 2025. But in the meantime, they said single-use replacements, those paper bag option also increases the amount of shipping. They're very heavy and very bulky, and so it put more trucks on the road, and so more emissions. And so they said we're trading one environmental hazard for another environmental hazard. So that was the other environmental concern that the retailers had. The environmental advocate groups contended that local legislation has already been successful elsewhere, and that being a Dillon Rule state, the state legislators have already given the sanction to the localities to make local legislation, and so we really need an opportunity to have a tangible first step in implementing something that can make a measurable difference in moving forward. And so their focus was that local legislation has already happened elsewhere, and they really strongly encouraged the review of case studies in other areas of Virginia to look at the progress, some of them for years and others not even a year yet, and they're just kind of getting their steam. Finally, again, it was the heart's cry of the third session was we care about the environment. We're passionate about the environment. We want to be creative in solutions for the environment, and we can't just keep postponing solutions. But whatever we do, please let it be equitable, and please let the ideas be truly doable for harder to reach populations, less mobile populations, lower income populations, and the small business person. And so those were the primary environmental concerns for the three sessions. Now let's look session by session. So first of all, the highlights of the stakeholder input from the retail industry. The key themes for this session, the first one was they really wanted to stress that they have extensive voluntary commitment to environmental sustainability. And the extent of that, they submitted following the session. All of the sessions, I encouraged people, whatever we couldn't cover in the session, to submit supplemental resources. And so extensive supplemental resources were submitted, which are included as attachments in the full report. But extensive voluntary commitment to already do environmental sustainability efforts. And they also, on several occasions, said that they wanted to offer to develop a collective retailer MOU for the city of Virginia Beach that really kind of was a public declaration of all the things that they were open and willing and ready to do, what they were already doing, and what they were willing to do for the city of Virginia Beach. And part of that would be obviously making known what the efforts already are, but also finding and listening to, on the grassroots level, on the voluntary grassroots level, solutions that they can help implement with. And on that, they are really interested in elevating their collaboration with the local community for environmental sustainability. And their stress was statewide rather than local bag fee legislation, so they could have uniform implementation. And the need for local flexibility and collaboration for any decisions that were made was really one of the the big things when I said, what's the most important thing? If you had to walk away, what are the key terms? And those were the two: local flexibility and collaboration. So the key themes for the environmental advocates, the first big one is that this is not a silver bullet solution. They're not looking at this as the end all be all. This is the way that we're going to fix everything, but rather it's a holistic approach, and it's a first step, a tangible step, a measurable step that can really help with some measurable behavioral changes that can be long-term seen, that will actually curb the behavior patterns of the city. They stressed the urgency for that tangible first step, and that the fee could fund the necessary infrastructures and offset financial burdens, stressing that there are a lot of infrastructures that are lacking in our city for environmental sustainability, and this bag fee, though it is expected to not be a forever occurrence, because the idea is to curb people's behavior so the income should slowly go down. But while it was at its peak, it could fund the necessary long-term infrastructures to offset that financial burden. Again, this session sent extensive resources, supplemental resources. I really want to encourage you to look at the attachments that are in the full report for all of the supplemental resources that were submitted. But they cited some case studies of how that financial burden has been offset in other localities. And again, it's a holistic approach for long-term sustainability, not a quick fix. And they are convinced that the City of Virginia Beach community will largely be in support of the bag fee because of the above reasons. And going back to really something all of the people said is make it easy. And their argument was the fee would make it easy for behavior modification. So the third session, the stakeholder community members, the key themes that ended up kind of surfacing. The first one, really a broad spectrum of community interests, from human rights to the Tea Party to environmental stakeholders, regular citizen stakeholders, the aging, the youth. There was just such a broad spectrum of interests there, and yet they all came together with a shared value and sense of deep urgency to do something, and a deep care for the environment in the City of Virginia Beach. It was really encouraging to see that. The creativity to solve what they call the plastics problem and other single-use litter in the City of Virginia Beach without placing a financial burden on individuals and businesses. So they didn't want to have to pick one or the other. They really want real solutions, and they really want not a financial burden on especially the vulnerable populations. Many expressed surprise to discover their own misconceptions. When you get that many people in the room with that many, that broad of a spectrum of interests, it's amazing what can come to the surface, what can come out. And people were really surprised. They came in, I don't want to say, they came in very passionate. We'll say they came in very passionate. But as they started listening to one another and the experiences, the lived experiences that represented the concerns that the different groups brought out, some of them they hadn't considered the experiences that were lived by other groups. And they started to get more curious about one another and really started, it turned into a really neat brainstorming session. And so a lot of the ideas that came out that are also in the supplemental content in the back of the report. But they expressed surprise to discover their own misconceptions. Many things are stated as fact, and that in fact were true in the evolution of what is recyclable and what is not recyclable in the city, what there is access to and what there is not access to in the city, protocols for what goes in the blue bin and what does not. And there were a lot of people in the room that were surprised by things that were stated. And again, my job was not to test the veracity of any statement, and my job was not to test the feasibility of any idea, but rather to capture it all and to report it back. But it really kind of blew the lid off of the vast amount of misconceptions and curiosity of people's vulnerabilities and concerns. And one of the big things that kept coming out is that we really need to listen to each other more. We need to see each other more. We need to be in better touch with the needs of the groups in the neighborhoods that we don't represent. And in 2 out of the 3 sessions, one of the things that came out is that people would say, well, some people just don't care. Some people just don't care. And the reality is that oftentimes people that seem like they don't care, it's that the things that are important to them have not been connected to the consequences that matter to them. For example, neighborhoods that don't have a river running through it, or a lake, or a drainage, a pond that's pretty. They're not thinking about our beautiful waterways. They don't maybe have any regular exposure to the rivers. A lot of people don't go to the ocean as often as we assumed that they would. And it's a very spread out city. And so what does concern them? Well, plastic litter that blocks their sewage and backs up their sewage or causes flooding. That matters to them. But if they're not thinking of the drainage and the sewage as part of clean waterways, they're not thinking about it. And so that goes back to that misconceptions. There's such a low level of going outside of the group that we're comfortable in. I mean, that's normal, right? That's the human nature. And so it really kind of came out with this concern. And so widely expressed surprise to learn what other groups are already doing in the community. So this was one of the things that I thought was extremely interesting. But within the 3rd session, the things that came out, opportunities, different materials that are able to be recycled. People are like, really, where? Really, I had no idea, that sort of thing, as well as maybe we should do X, Y, Z. And of course, I was there as facilitating a listening session, and I couldn't say, oh, well, that's already being done. I heard in the other session that's already being done. And yet in all 3 sessions, ideas were coming out that people wanted to get on board, but they're already happening and people didn't know. So again, that really stressed the need to have more of these. So the common ground, again, every single group shared a sense of urgency and a profound sense of care for the environment, which was highly encouraging to see. A holistic approach was desired. Nobody was looking for a magic button, a simple law or a single behavior thing that was going to change everything, and a desire to connect the dots. What do we not know? What are we not asking? And so the other things are, again, an awakening to misconceptions and options that are already available, and getting creative with communication. So there are a lot of opportunities these days to communicate. We think about the different venues of communication, but we don't think necessarily about tailoring our message to different groups. What's important to different groups, different neighborhoods, different needs come out. The aged have a different set of needs and values from the teenagers. And Green Run has very different needs and concerns to, say, Sandbridge. And all of them care about the things that touch them. And so how can we get creative in the way that we communicate? And another thing that came out in the 3rd session that just was exciting was that, like the 1st session, they talked about wanting to come together to figure out, let's all find out what we already are doing and what we're all committing to do. And so like the MOU of the retailers, they started talking about how can we make a public commitment and get together and compare notes and see what we're already doing, and how can we commit to support the efforts of one another. And that desire for public commitment was cited in all 3 sessions. They all said, we want industry and community and environmental advocates. We want to all work together. And so final considerations for the future. The first one, again, elevate coordinated public communication. One of the ways that I would suggest to elevate the coordinated public communication is to go where the people are. To go into the neighborhoods where people don't get out much. To go to the places where people assume that their voice doesn't really matter. And because of that, they don't give as much thought to what they think about things. And yet they're behaviors or lack of behaviors are profoundly impacting all of us every day. So considerations for the future also include recalibrating education and awareness efforts. Every single session talked about how the kids of the city of Virginia Beach get it, how they are passionate, and there's been concerted effort to make sure for several years as they're growing up, don't put the plastic bag in the blue bin, just different things. Don't put the plastic bag in the garbage. A sea turtle can eat it and think it's a jellyfish. Different things like that that I never knew. I didn't grow up in a beach town. So children are reached for the most part, and the people that children touch get reached because the children talk. And environmental advocates are reached. People that care already about the environment get involved with other people who care about the environment. So who's not reached? Again, the people that don't get out much, the people who don't have kids, the people who aren't mobile, who aren't a member of an organization or some social group that's already socially aware and care. And then the last one is to broaden engagement with stakeholders. Again, go where the people are and ask new questions. Find out what's important to them and connect what is meaningful and the behaviors that you want to see changed to the consequences that will impact their neighborhood. And that's all I have. Oh, I did want to say thank you to all of the organizations who contributed to the listening session. There's a list also in the full report. And for the next 3 minutes, we have plenty of time for questions.
Okay,
Yes.
Michael, and then thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the presentation, and thanks to Mr. Branch and Ms. Henley for organizing this session. I know some people who were involved with it, and they enjoyed the conversation. I just have some thoughts, not really questions, that I'd like to share about this. But I'd like to begin really by just making sure the public, as well as the council, are made aware of a letter we received from the Virginia Beach Human Rights Commission on the 17th of this month, which was written on behalf of the entire Human Rights Commission, indicating, among other things, we feel that extending the deferment to February 2023 would allow for more adequate time to research this multifaceted issue, exploring the feasibility and impact of the tax on Virginia Beach residents, specifically the potential disproportionate effect on lower socioeconomic groups like people who are homeless and those on fixed incomes like the elderly. These vulnerable groups are already struggling to meet their basic needs without an additional burden. We respectfully ask that City Council consider this deferral extension to allow city staff's thorough assessment of all avenues that can improve the cleanliness of our city in a way that benefits all residents of Virginia Beach. So I wanted to make sure the public and the council is very, very well aware of this request from our Human Rights Commission. And I know from serving on the Human Rights Commission that when they send a letter like this, they adopt that letter as with a formal vote, and that's what occurred here. As just for my own comments, I'd like to say, and I appreciate all the work you did, and I appreciate the vast stakeholder engagement around this issue, and I think we really need to use some common sense here. I have a lot of questions about the impact, not only that a fee like this would have on people who are already struggling to meet their basic needs, but also I haven't seen any evidence that demonstrates that, for example, applying this fee to grocery stores, it creates a revenue source that we can use for environmental improvements, and that's important. But I'm committed to supporting environmental improvements as a matter of policy without this unique funding source. And I think as a community, we have to think about ways that we can prioritize the needs of our community from an environmental perspective and make sure they receive and they're resourced in the fashion that they deserve as a separate independent policy matter. We don't necessarily need to create separate funding streams for this purpose, because we should be willing and have the courage to stand up and to fund the things that are important to our community. So that's number one. Number two, I haven't seen any evidence that shows that, for example, having a fee for bags for grocery stores, it doesn't eliminate the bags that are at convenience stores, at Wawa, at 7-Eleven, at Walmart, at Target, at the hardware store. There's a variety of many other places. That doesn't mention your retail shopping for clothes and other things. We're not eliminating those bags. And that's a concern for me. And I think as a council, we really need to understand what the actual impact of it is. And then finally, I'll just add, I mean, I'm a very strong proponent of resiliency, of environmental protection, of a clean and beautiful city, 100%. But the policy has to make sense. And I've heard very compelling comments about why we need to protect our environment, to save our environment, to keep plastic out of our stormwater systems so that neighborhoods like mine have stormwater systems with integrity and that they're not encumbered by things like single-use plastics. I'm for all that. But I want a policy that makes sense. And I have yet to see actual factual information that demonstrates that. Also, one thing that was in your slide a lot referred to behavior modification. I really have some problems with that term. I don't think it's the role of government to be modifying behavior. It's the role of government at times to educate people. It's the role of government to create policies that are good for our community. But I don't want a government whose goal it is to modify my behavior just as a matter of course. I have really concerns with that approach, and if it's the inspiration philosophy for a policy like this, I think for me, I'm extremely suspicious and extremely concerned with that approach. Thank you.
Guy, and then John, and then Sabrina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Dr. Bouchard, for being here. Just for the public's sake, I just want to make sure your expertise is in what?
So my PhD is in organizational development and organizational leadership. And so my expertise was brought in to help with the facilitation of the discussion, not in, my expertise is not in environmental or political venues or areas.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your being with us today. Let's talk about the political first. You know, and speaking my friend here wants to be practical, let's talk practical. The retail stores, I understand, want statewide legislation. So do I, just to make that clear. Are we going to get it? Absolutely not. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And anybody who wants to challenge that, go right ahead. But I think the politics of the situation are. The General Assembly, during one period in 2020, gave the right to localities to enact this kind of legislation. If they had wanted to have a statewide thing, they certainly could have done it then. Are they more or less likely to do it now? I'd say less likely. Would this governor veto it even if the legislature did pass it? Absolutely he would. So let's be real, let's be practical. Practical answer is, if we want to have something that has the effect that it's had in other localities that have adapted it, and I suggest to Mr. Bellucci that in the time between now and the time we defer this, hopefully we can educate him and everybody else around here on the actual effects that have had. Speaking of that, just to make sure we understand, the stores that are included, as I understand it, include drugstores, include food retailers, and include convenience stores, all of which I think Mr. Bellucci's comment suggested might not be included in this. Let me ask you another question. Do you know how many localities have adapted this already?
I do not. And actually, I'll clarify and say, I intentionally did not do research outside of the listening session because I wanted to make sure that what I presented was only given to me by, the lines get blurred really easily. Yeah.
I get it. Well, in my last count, I think it was about 8, and they are in various parts of the state. We would be the first in this area, but that's something I think we could take some great pride in and being a leader in this area. I want to emphasize the urgency matter that came up. Did you find any of the 3 groups that said this wasn't an urgent issue?
All of them said it was urgent.
All of them, including even the retailers.
Oh, yes.
Yet the retailers say, let's wait till 2025. We can eliminate the plastic bags then, or some of them do anyway. Right?
Yeah, what the retailers really focused on, and it's in the attachments. They focused on a broad spectrum of things that they're doing. Plastic bags was just one of the things, but included in their initiative things like food waste, eliminating food waste, other things. But yes, the deadline that they discussed was, some of them have already eliminated plastic bags, but the majority have said by 2025.
Do you know how much plastic waste we've eliminated in the 60, 70 years we've been working on this?
No idea. I
If I told you it was 10% or less of the plastic out there, would you be surprised?
Probably not.
Maybe gives you some idea of why people do think this is an urgent issue. You talked about one of the reactions being that businesses, the cost on businesses. I don't know whether you're aware, but I want to make sure the public's aware that the enabling legislation here allows businesses to keep part of the fee that's collected in order to cover those costs, right? Could I talk about the kinds of bags? You suggested that the alternative is paper bags and paper, or the retailers did, and that paper bags are very expensive and problematic in their own right. Are you aware of any programs in any areas that have tried to get into the hands of users non bags, what I would call all those bags that sit in the back of my car that I've gotten from various places and people over the time, some but very few of which I paid for, but they're out there, cloth bags, if you will.
All of the listening sessions talked about multi-use bags as part of the solution.
And I just want to make sure people understand, in some cities, the educational processes and the community engagement process has involved enormous efforts by local people that are very, very interested in this, as you did, which was a good thing coming out of this listening session, of how many different groups are very interested in marshaling those folks together to produce a bag program that gets bags in the hands of anybody that wants and needs them is a realistic answer to the, we'd have to go to paper bag issue. And I think given a little time, we could make that work. Could you go to the stakeholder input slide? I'm sorry if there was a number on it, I couldn't see it.
Which stakeholder input was it?
The one that of the retail industry.
Retail industry, sure. And just to clarify again, my role was just to listen and capture.
I got
so any accuracy or anything like that, other than accuracy of what was said, is outside my realm of.
Right. This is what you got coming from the retailers,
Correct.
not
Yes,
not your input.
Right.
I get that. So the first bullet is voluntary commitment to environmental sustainability, and they offer to create an MOU of environmental sustainability. I would just note that as I said, in 60 or 70 years, we haven't seen much action in terms of this. Where we did see some action is when these cities have adopted these use fees, which I prefer to a tax, although they're literally a tax. There has been some action, it really has. And now my friend here doesn't think we should encourage people to change their behavior that way. I tend to disagree. Look at number 3, elevating collaborate. What's the difference between item 3 and the 5th item there? Is there any difference?
Good question. So interested in elevating collaboration was simply talking about wanting to get more specific with Virginia Beach in how they collaborate with the city. And the last one was just saying, bottom line, whatever you do, please make sure that it's collaborative and flexible. So that's the.
All right. Well, I don't want to go on any longer because we're going to have more opportunity, I hope, to have a full discussion about that. I don't object to having some deferral of this to make sure that we've got full community input and education. I would simply say, in my belief, that these reusable bags are the answer, not plastic, not paper. That's what's working, it's happening, it's doing. And if you say, well, let's just then watch it, let it happen on its own, or let's all get together and talk about it and it'll happen. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but we know from watching what's happening in measurable ways that the reduction of plastic in the communities that have adopted this local fee pursuant to this legislation has been successful. And I urge everyone who's listening to this and all my fellow council members to focus on that fact, as well as all the other information that you've provided to us. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, John and Sabrina.
I just have two observations. One, when people say low income, that means something different to everyone. And today, people would tell you that 80% of Americans, relative to the cost of living today, can't make it end because of the cost of food and everything else. So now you're talking 80% of the population, not the traditional urban family of four and index. So I think when you talk, people make that term, everyone says it, but it means something to everybody different. But statistically speaking, in the environment that we are in, everyone's telling us that 80% of American families today are struggling. So we have to think of a bigger base when we talk about the free bags. That's just one observation. Secondly, this is just a comment for my peers here, there ought to be, if we're going to be banning bags in 2025, then this thing should have a sunset provision. It should not be a consistent source. When the source of the legislation that it covers and those people have stopped using plastic bags because they've banned them and they've gone away, the legislation itself should be inoperative, and therefore there should be a sunset provision, I do believe. I know that in Maine and Vermont, Walmart is a major generator of plastic bags, unlike Costco or Sam's Club or any of these other things that they give you a cardboard box if you'll take one. But they did a voluntary thing in those two states. I realize that doesn't get to the instant. I agree with your assessment about the General Assembly, and that wouldn't pass the current General Assembly if this certainly was a Democratic initiative, and let's be honest. But nonetheless, it's the law, and no one wanted to be responsible for raising a fee. They always punt those things to us, as we all know, who've sat here a long time, as we're the people that make the tough decisions because we're the ones that rise it. But I also know that plastic bags, just like when you buy a pesticide, you don't realize it, but you're paying a price for the disposal fund, and it's embedded into the price of the product because there's an externality that the marketplace doesn't honor, so it's embedded in the price. You just don't see it. But believe me, you are paying it. This is now trying to focus it on someone, but I do believe we should never articulate it that we're using this as revenue to meet the needs which taxes are for. But if we change if we change where the revenue goes, like to a food bank to buy food for people, rather than to educate people and do all like what you suggested, which are inherent governmental functions. So we reward the people who need food and who are the food bank. Yesterday, Monday, we said 1,200 people came through that food bank, and they were people of all income stratas at our site. They're at the amphitheater. So I think if we change where the revenue stream goes while it existed to meet the very problem why people are struggling to buy food, I think it doesn't look like we're rewarding advocacy. We really are looking for the change in behavior and not raising a revenue stream to meet a basic need in the environment, which we should address at a core revenue. So I think we can take the edge off, but I do think we're going to have to rethink who is that group. And really it's all about the top 20% of the income stream today that are overstressed in every dimension. Natural gas is $9.50 per million BTU. A year ago, it was $2.50. So if you don't think people in this winter heating their homes are going to be stretched, you're not watching the market. So I just ask us to be sensitive to that as we move forward. And I understand what you're trying to capture is capture that externality, makes sense. But how that's done and where the revenues go has a lot to do with the acceptance. And I think we can get there if we think about who's being hurt and how to put money in their pocket to buy food. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Sabrina, then Barbara.
Thank you. And I do want to thank Council Members Branch and Henley for being liaisons here and bringing this
presentation forward, and thank you so much for articulating the results of this key stakeholder meeting, which I have to say, it really, the information that you've brought forward today makes me feel a bit more at ease, which I'm sure it will also help residents to also understand how it's doable, because we all want to do the right thing. It's just how do you do it, you know? And so I think what's come forth in the key stakeholder meeting is we know this is a good thing to do, but breaking it down. That's why I think the part of the presentation you talked about doing that groundwork, it helps when you do that groundwork early and you're intentional about moving forward with the process, but you address some of those hurdles that people are having a problem with. I particularly like the fact of outreach, getting the bags in the hands of people who may not necessarily can afford to pay that extra money, because that's what I'm hearing, quite frankly, from residents. You know, we've got a lot already, even if it's 5 cents. How do you know I can afford the 5 cents for each bag? You know, that's the kinds of things that I'm hearing. But if we can get them the reusable bag and it's available, easily accessible, I think that may help them because they see a way forward. So I guess for me, it's how do we make sure we deploy that effort in a timely manner so that when this legislation, you know, goes forward, we're ready. It's not as difficult to implement. And so I would be interested in finding out how we could do that. If it's something, you know, on our communications team or marketing department that we can do, I'd like to be a part of that and help get the word out, help get those bags out. I think I started using reusable bags during the pandemic. So now I take it with me wherever I go, but it had to be something that caused me to do it. And after you do it in a routine manner, then it becomes a bit easier because it can be quite shocking. You know, I remember years ago I heard about California not having and using those plastic bags, and you're going to retail stores like, what do you do? How do you carry these? So it was shocking then, but now going through the process, using them myself, seeing how things are changing, now it's a bit more malleable to me. And I think that process is something that, you know, everyone will have to go through, but it's a good process. It's for a good reason. And I think it's doable. I think but as long as we do that that important groundwork, getting that information out, educating people like you've been doing or you have done, having more of these meetings to have the regular citizen a part of it, so that we know how they feel and we know how to be helpful in this whole process. Because it's a process that's looks like it's inevitable, because we do want to take care of our environment. We do want to be wise in how we use certain things that negatively impact our environment. So it's an inevitable process, and so we just need to prepare to transition into that process and help the public to do so. But thank you so much. I enjoyed your presentation.
So glad.
Thank you. Barbara?
Just a few comments, and I can go on forever, so y'all can tell me when to stop. But as a bit of information before I make my comments, I did notice when I was filing July sales tax, now the sales tax form, when you form it or file it, the last line on it is plastic bag fee. So I guess that's seen as a part of the same collection. You know, the other exemptions that come in, you've got food and non-food and different things that are all calculated in there, and the dealer's discount is a small part of it and so forth. So that looks like that's the way it's being collected already in the state. But just to make some comments in relation to what we have done since we had this issue before the council, I think that the really neat thing, and I just get excited because I see this as an opportunity for us all to work together on something, and for it to be a very positive thing instead of negative, because we are listening to all of the groups that are impacted. and to call in all of the impacted groups and say, what are your issues? Let's put them all on the table. And then let's see how we can work through this to address everybody's issues. So when we come up with a finished product, we know that everybody has been heard and so forth. And it will take us longer than until September 6th. So I think we are going to probably need to do a deferral to look at all of this. And I think the common ground part of your presentation is so important because there is common ground from all three of these elements, the retailers and the environmental group and then the general public. And these common ground elements, I think, give us so many opportunities in developing this holistic approach, because that's what we can do, and it can be made easy. First of all, of course, we decide what is the problem we're trying to solve, and I think that coming up with this idea that we're looking for healthy, beautiful waterways, everybody wants healthy, beautiful waterways, and keeping the plastic out of those waterways seemed to be the theme that we were hearing in that first round of public hearings. So if that's the problem we're trying to solve, how do we solve it? And how do we measure that success and so forth? But I see also other elements that are coming in here that we can work with as well while we're trying to come up with this whole thing, connecting the dots, making it easy, and working with the public, working with everybody, because everybody wants our waterways to be clean and healthy and beautiful. And we want to do what we can to do it. And I see that we are looking at plastic as being a part of our litter problem. We're looking at it as a part of our recycle issues, because of course the retailers say, you know, we've got those recycle bins going into our stores that we encourage people to recycle, and we can continue that with better signage and so forth as we help people. So what does that tell us? Another problem we know we've got is the recycling that we're doing. It's not working very well. We've got to come up with some decisions on our recycling soon. So can we work on that as a part of this too, and helping educate people about what's recyclable in those blue bins and what isn't and so forth. And if it's not, can't go in that blue bin, or there are other places that you can recycle it. So I see us as working with our litter problem, waste control issues, because it's certainly not just these one plastic bags. And don't forget, there are so many exemptions even in the grocery store that I feel mighty sorry for that poor checker if he's got to stand there and tell the person, well, I don't have to charge you for this bag because there's meat in it, and I don't charge you for this bag because there's ice cream in it, but you just got cans here, so I've got to charge you. That's not, I don't think this is a good way to deal with it. But anyway, that's what we've got to look for, is a better approach that we can get to the problems, and having the retailers say, we're doing away with it anyway. And they've recognized that they're dealing with a lot of waste issues. And our opportunity to work together is tremendous here. And then I see it coming in with our flood control. Because if we are telling folks that we want to control this plastic litter because it's going to impact our waterways, gives us an opportunity to help people understand that that litter that's on the ground in front of your house is going to go to some waterway, and letting everybody learn where their waterway is a very important part of our flooding education. And we can do that as a part of this too. So I just see this holistic approach allowing us to deal with a lot of issues, dealing with it together in a very positive fashion. And who knows, we might solve this problem some other way. But I think having a few months now to look at this issue, look at it all together, and say, what can we do working together to deal with all of these issues, is going to give us a lot of opportunity. And the best opportunity of all is to have us to come together again and work on something together again, instead of all this division and isolation we've had for the past 2 years. So I just see a lot of good that can come of this, and I think it's going to be, I think we can make it a very positive thing. And I hope everybody, it's what we all try to do, is to make everybody happy. So we can try.
Okay, Linwood.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I echo Ms. Henley's comments, and she's living her words, because part of her campaign is her reusable bags that she's handing
Couldn't
out.
bring them today, though.
Okay, well, she's got them, and anybody wants one, she's got them. I also want to thank the staff, City Manager Duhaney and Melissa Zabutis, for putting together all of this, because that was their idea, not ours. And I'm very glad you all did it this way, because phase one of this was to get public input. And the way you all did it was very well done, and I appreciate that. Because I think it is important to get a lot of public input before you make big decisions. I would echo Ms. Henley that, and particularly coming out of COVID, I think we've lost good habits, and reinstilling those habits, and certainly this effort would be front and center of good habits that I would like to see us get back into, which is protecting the environment and good litter control, and also touching a lot more than just those plastic bags. I have a business and I clean my parking lot every morning, and there's a whole lot of stuff in there in addition to some plastic bags. And so just getting that holistic approach. So I would really like to see come out of this as a next step, the positive reinforcement options for the citizens to help with this issue. And I would task staff and the stakeholders to come up with those kind of positive issues, including the retailers that have the bags, because I found them to be very forthcoming and wanting to be part of the solution and not the problem. So I'd like to continue working on this as well. I think we're onto something that we can have a holistic approach and a lot bigger bang if we do this thing right. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
I just would say, since the word holistic's been used about 28 times in the last few minutes, I just would like to also urge a sense of urgency. This is a problem that we have a solution for a part of it, not the silver bullet as the advocacy folks says, but there is one of the uniform approach is there as a sense of urgency about it. And I'm all for holistic approaches, but I think that should not slow down workable sub-approaches, if you will, that present themselves to us. I think the community deserves it. I think they want it. I think they will respond positively to it. And I think the experience in some of our sister cities like Roanoke and others who have had good lead in. You don't make it effective now, you make it effective several months out. And then you turn to your retailers and you say, here's how you can be it. You can provide these bags for us with your own advertising on it, and we can educate people how to do it. That's part of the holistic problem, but I just don't want the urgency to lose its sense either. I'm not for an early vote. I think we do need to talk about it some, but this is a problem that I don't want to see get in some long-term. We'll get to it.
Okay, Michael, and then if we could move on.
Thank you.
This is a very important thing, but we're behind.
It is an important thing, and I appreciate that. I always want to clarify my remarks since they were referenced earlier. I'm not opposed to encouraging people to modify behavior, to change behavior. What I'm opposed to is the compulsion of it through a tax or through a fee. And I just think we really need to bring and bear down some common sense into this conversation. If Walmart and 7-Eleven are included, which is news to me, that further complicates matters, because how are people who have challenges with their income, who may not be, I go down to the oceanfront a lot, and there's a 7-Eleven there that's very busy. Most of the people who visit there walk up, and they're buying actually food items to bring back to their apartments or to their homes. And they use bags to get it there. Not everyone has the luxury to store reusable bags in their back seat. I think this is a really challenging discussion that we need to spend a lot of time on, which is why I support the deferral. But I think I'm concerned this is being looked at as a revenue source rather than an environmental resiliency issue. And we really need to move away from that. And I guess I would just pose the rhetorical question. If plastic bags and single-use plastics are so bad, number one, I'm looking around this table, I see single-use plastics spread all over it. So when are we going to modify our own behavior? And number two, why don't we just ban plastic bags? if they're such a problem for our environment and for our stormwater system, and then why are we talking about taxing them? Why don't we just ban them?
Because we can't.
Well,
Okay, folks, if you don't mind at this point, I think the discussion will be ongoing, so thank you very much for hanging in there. Appreciate it.
So next week, though, we have to vote on the referral.
Yeah, we'll vote on
It'll
it.
be on the agenda, but we
Yeah.
suggest an indefinite.
Yep,
Not next week, 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks.
29th.
Okay, city council's briefings, proposed changes to the city code regarding personnel properties and Virginia.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of council, as Regina gets up, as previously communicated, staff has been identifying ways to quicken our hiring process and to enhance our recruitment efforts, including bringing on outside consultant and working with the city council's process improvement steering committee. Part of this work also includes looking at areas of the city code that could be possibly amended to enhance our recruitment and retention efforts from a staff compensation standpoint. Councilmember Branch has requested that we bring forward some of the city code change areas forward to have a discussion with council on these areas to determine interest in bringing these forward for council's consideration and to address any questions or requests for information that council may have on these specific areas. With that, Regina.
Hey, welcome, Regina.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, City Council. Last October, you may remember that there was a group of us that came before you, myself and some of the department directors, to let you know that we were having some difficulty with filling some of our positions. And we wanted you to know the impacts that that was having. Well, we spoke at that time about the fact that there was a smaller labor force participation that we were experiencing. So there were fewer people that were vying for jobs. And it wasn't just for the city of Virginia Beach or even just our state. This was a global phenomenon that we were all going through. So today is basically a follow-up to that presentation, but I also want to take the opportunity to provide some thoughts on what we can consider as far as policy and code changes are concerned. We're bringing those forward because we're hearing from City Council wants to put something forward to make sure that we're doing the most that we can do to fill our positions. So we have been in contact with the department directors. We've looked at the surveys from our employees to try to get information and some ideas on what can be brought forward. We've also looked at our peers to see where we may be less competitive in some areas. So that's the genesis of some of the recommendations we're bringing forth for your consideration. All right, so last October, this was a slide that we showed you at that point. And it was from Pew Research, and it was, just this comforting message that said, a full recovery of the labor market appears distant. So we wanted to see what was being said now. What is out there at this point. So we had something from Oxford Economics, and it says basically that employers are holding tight to their existing workers while staying in a hiring mode. And then we have something from Mission Square, and I'm going to read this for you. It says that while 81% of local and state government respondents reported hiring new employees, 69% said that more employees were quitting, while 60% said more were retiring than in 2020. So we want to see what does that look like for Virginia Beach. So first, here is our vacancy rate. So the percentage of positions that are vacant in our city over the last 5 years. And let me say this, when I talk about data for 2022, for the current year, I'm giving you the latest data that we can give you. Of course, later in the year, we'll have year-end data, but for now, we're giving you the latest information we can for 2022. So, and that statement carries throughout the presentation. So what we're seeing right now is that for 2022, our vacancy rate is holding steady with where we were in 2021 at 12%. It is still higher than where we have been in the past at 9 and 10%, but at least it is holding steady from where we were. Are we seeing more retirements than we saw in 2020? Yes, yes we are. So if you look at the far right, you'll see that in 2022, we show 172 retirements through July 1st. Well, I can tell you that last year in 2021, we had not reached 172 even as of September of last year. So we are on par to exceed the number of retirements from last year. And of course, that would also be higher than in 2020, since we had already exceeded that in 2021. This slide shows the departments and human resources intensity to really get out there and get the positions filled. So if you look at 2022, this is through June 30th, you'll see that we had 992 requisitions. Requisitions would represent the positions that we are advertising. So 992 requisitions through June 30th. So we are pretty much on track to exceed the number of advertisements that we had in 2021. And also, and you may look at 2020 and think that that number is very low, and it is low, and that's because we had a hiring freeze in 2020, and that hiring freeze carried over actually into 2021. And then you look at the number of applications. We are on pace to exceed the number of applications that we received in 2021, but not in comparison to what we used to get if you look at 2019. And I think the more telling measure is to look at that last column, which shows that the average number of applications we receive per requisition. So far, we're at 20 applications per requisition, slightly lower than we were at 2021. Of course, it remains to be seen what will happen at the end of the year, but we are a little bit lower than we were. So you're probably wondering, well, we're holding steady, but is there any good news that I can share? And yes, there is some good news. First, I would show you this information. This was put together by a media outlet, and they were comparing the vacancy rates of the various municipalities in Hampton Roads. So the percentage of positions that are vacant. And as you can see, for those that responded to this survey, you look at Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach actually had the lowest vacancy rate in comparison to these other localities. So that was great to see, especially since I know that these other localities are working hard. They are trying their best to get these positions filled. So it was comforting to see that we did have the lowest vacancy rate. And there's a lot of good news on this slide. First, if you look at it, probably doesn't look like good news at first glance, but it actually is. This is just looking at the months of June and July. If you look at the number of vacancies for July, you see 897 vacancies, and that's more vacancies than we had in June 30th at 864. However, July was the start of the fiscal year. So we had new positions that City Council approved in the July budget. So if you factored out those new positions, you would actually see that we did reduce the number of vacancies we had, and it would actually be closer to 825 vacancies compared to that 864 last month. On the next line, that next row, you'll see the number of offers accepted. So how many people accepted our job offer? And that has gone up. 183 job offers compared to 147 that were accepted. And we have a few fewer job offers declined, 4 in comparison to 7. And then the actual number of people that we onboarded, that we actually brought into the organization, also went up, 145 in comparison to 115. So a lot of movement, a lot of good news on that slide, I think. Perhaps the best news that I can share with you today is our turnover. And our turnover has gone down. We are retaining our employees better than we had been. So if you look at the turnover for 2022, and again, this is so far this year, but we'll see what happens towards the end of the year. But we were at if you're counting the turnover, not including retirements, we're at 6.21%. And if you include retirements, we're at 9.17%. Either way, we have lower turnover than we have had the prior 3 years. So that, I think, is positive for us. So what steps have we taken? What do we think has helped us in this regard? Well, there are a lot of changes that have been made. We have been working to change our practices to hopefully affect change in the positive direction. So with the hiring practices, an example of what we've done is we used to bring people on board. So we would onboard new employees every other week or twice a month. We changed that practice, and now we are hiring people. We're bringing them on board every week. They may not go to new member orientation every week, but we are bringing them in, and then they will go to new member orientation as soon as possible. We've made it easier for people to qualify for our positions. We have always given credit for degrees. So for example, if someone had a 4-year degree and it was related to the position they were applying for, they would get 4 years credit for that degree. If it was unrelated, they received half credit. We are no longer giving the half credit. If it is a degree, we're counting it, a 4-year degree, as 4 years experience, a 2-year degree as 2. We're not looking to make that judgment call about how related it is to the position. Technology, we are letting technology be our friend. We are routing correspondence now, and I mentioned this during my budget presentation to you as well. So our correspondence for approval is routed electronically. We can approve the request on our mobile devices. So it is routed electronically within Human Resources. And then it leaves Human Resources and goes to the city manager's office, to our deputy city managers and our city manager electronically. So all of this can be done from mobile devices, and it has really shortened our turnaround time. We are marketing our positions. We have our positions marketed on as many social media platforms as we can, and that seems to be gaining traction as well. We have a social media campaign, and we are working with communications office now to get a new campaign so that we can keep everything fresh out there in the community. We provide hiring and retention bonuses. I think you're aware of those. We provide those for certain hard to fill positions, such as positions in human services or positions that require a CDL. So we do have the bonuses in play now. And as you all are very much aware, we do have the new pay system in place that rewards overall city tenure as put forth by council. All right, this is a slide that I also showed you last October. And this slide shows on the left some of the significant or recently implemented benefits or practices that were put into place. And then it showed on the right some of the things that we were going to be working on. One of the things that I would say about our benefits is that we have been working over the years to try to modernize our benefits, to make sure that our benefits are meeting the employee needs. We have to meet the employees where they are, so to speak. And probably the best example of that is our maternity leave policy. In our maternity leave policy, we have leave for the birthing parent. We have leave for the non-birthing parent. We have leave for adoptive parents. And then we recognize that the average age of our employees is 44. So they are part of that sandwich generation where they could be needing to take care of children or child caring responsibilities, but then they may also have parents that may need attention. This policy also provides leave to allow them to take care of parents as well as children. So that's an example of what I mean by saying meet the employees where they are. So these policies are here, and then there were several that we have been working on since October. Some have been implemented, and I'll just say, such as that total compensation study. Some have been reviewed and not implemented. such as the benefit related to childcare. I think we looked at some options for childcare, and we provided some of those options to City Council. And then there are some that are pending implementation, such as the Transitional Jobs Program. The Transitional Jobs Program is an effort being led by the City Manager's Office. It is an opportunity to work with individuals who have been involved in the justice system. It involves us working with Tidewater Community College in an 8-week program where Tidewater will provide them with job readiness skills training, on the job training to make them successful in a work environment, while the city provides the actual work experience in a part-time job. What we want to do is to work with them through this 8-week program, and then if they are successful in completing the program, we'll have an opportunity to convert them to full-time city positions. We're doing this on a pilot basis. We hope to have 10 participants in the program, and we want to initiate the program in September. So hopefully we'll get some positive traction out of that. And then the other thing that's up here that was pending is the modification of the shift differential ordinance. And that's going to require a code change, so I want to take a little bit of time and look at that. Our current shift differential ordinance provides a 5% additional pay if you are permanently assigned to a shift that starts between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. And if you are the hours that fall within 3 p.m. to 3 a.m., those are the hours for which you would get the shift differential. The hours that fall outside of that, you would not. All right, that's how it currently works. What we are proposing is that we change this so that the hours would be 4 p.m. to 8 a.m. and the differential would be 10%, and it would apply to anyone assigned to work that shift, right? So, and we kind of modeled this out of the Office of Personnel Management so that, this proposal is very similar to what they have. If we implemented this, it would have a cost of $1.25 million. However, what we're thinking is that we change the hours to better meet the needs of some of the departments that have these overnight shifts. And they felt as if the 4 to 8 was more in line and would help them more than the 3 to 3 that we currently have. Also, when they're assigned to that shift, as long as the majority of their hours fall within that time period, all of their hours will be paid at that differential. And we're hoping that the increased rate will encourage the employees to stay at that shift rather than at the earliest opportunity moving out and going into another shift. We also want to include 911 and 311. Their evening and overnight shift is where they have the largest turnover. They have high turnover anyway, but this would be that time period is their largest turnover. And we would also apply it to DHS, their nursing staff, because that is an industry standard. It's almost an expectation that they would have the shift differential. Almost half of that cost, or a little bit over half of that cost, would be from human services. So one thing that when we talked to the process improvement steering committee about the shift differential, a question came up and they said, well, suppose someone decides to work those hours and they had some options, but they chose to work those hours, or they just continued to work and they fell into those hours. Would they get the shift differential? And the answer is no, they would not. You would have to be assigned by management to work that shift in order for the shift differential to come into place. All right, so there are also some other items that we wanted to bring forth to you. Again, we feel as if we have made some progress. We're already marketing our positions. We've already made plenty of changes to our practices, but we're trying to be responsive to what we're hearing from that City Council wants to make some changes and trying to take all of the feedback we can to bring forth some items for you to consider. So the first one that we wanted to bring forth is the code change pertaining to hiring above the pay range minimum. Currently, a department cannot hire above the minimum of the pay range without coming to Human Resources and or the city manager for approval. What we're proposing here is that we change this so that the departments can go up to 10% above the minimum on their own. So they would have the flexibility to look at the requirements of the candidates and their experience and make the decision as to whether or not to hire at 10% above or on their own. So that is the major change to that. We would continue to be involving Human Resources if it exceeded the 10%, and we would continue to involve the city manager if it exceeded 20%. Now, to help put this in perspective, we looked at 9 months of hiring in 2021. And what we found is that 41% of the requests that we received to hire above the minimum are at 10% above the minimum or below. So this could be a significant efficiency enhancer if we were to implement this practice. All right, then with promotions. Current ordinance provides that if someone is to receive a promotion of one range, they receive a 5% increase in pay. If they are getting 2 or more range promotion, they would receive a 10% increase in pay. And I think this ordinance has been in place probably since the 80s, as far as I can see. So we worked with the directors because we've been hearing that, we're not having as many internal people apply for the promotions, and there are some other, some employees say, well, we want to have more when we apply for these promotions. So we were trying to see what could be done. So a possible change that we looked at and where we were when we were talking to the Process Improvement Committee was, instead of this 5% and 10%, we could increase that base pay percentage. The problem was when we started increasing the base pay percentage, we were running into some possible salary compression issues. So we thought we're not trying to create an issue by enhancing the promotion. So we moved away from additional base pay and started looking at the bonus, because that does not impact the base pay of our individuals. So what we could do is we could say that if we're going to give a promotion that results in 5% base pay increase, we would also give a corresponding 5% lump sum bonus. If it was 10%, we would give the corresponding 10%. The other change that we could make with this is that some of you may be aware that when the city manager came aboard, City Manager Haney came aboard, he made more positions at will, non-merit. All right. So the main thrust of that is that those employees no longer have grievance rights. Well, that's scary for a lot of employees. If they have been here and they had grievance rights their career, and then they're looking at a position that they may apply to, but that position is going to be at will, it makes them a little bit hesitant to apply. Yes.
Council authorized you to do it.
Yes.
And they're concerned, it's a good thing they don't apply.
All right, so what we could do to encourage employees to apply for these positions is to allow those employees at that point to have discussions about their salary. So it would not necessarily be held to the 5 or 10%. It could be discussion or negotiation, so to speak. All right, the cost to doing this is we're estimating just based on last year's promotions. So we would estimate that the cost for doing these bonuses would be around $1.9 million. So if we implement something along these lines, we may be able to see more employees applying for our positions, but I think the main thing as well is that it addresses this complaint that we receive from our employees a lot, which is that if someone from outside had gotten this position, they would be able to negotiate their salary for what they would take for this position. But because I'm here, you're not allowing us anything other than that 5 or 10%. So it could help with that if this is something that City Council wants to look at. All right, and then there's the leave benefit. Let me explain first that we have two types of employees, and there are two types based on the Virginia retirement system. So the VRS changed some of the retirement benefits, and because of those changes, we put into place a different leave system for them. So we have Plan 1 and Plan 2 employees. Those are your longer tenured employees. Your hybrid employees are those employees who came on board as of 2014. So 2014 forward, if they came on board and they did not have any prior VRS experience, they're hired as hybrid employees. Hybrid employees come on board with short-term disability. They also have long-term, but for this discussion, they have short-term disability. It is part of their retirement package. Plan 1 and Plan 2 employees do not. Instead, they earn sick leave. And they earn sick leave every month, and it is not capped. They are allowed to just build up their sick leave balance, okay? And so that's considered their short and long-term disability, so to speak. All right, so what I want to do is go over this chart with you, make sure that we are all looking at understanding this chart the same. So if you just look at that first line, is 0 to coming in the door to less than 5 years of experience with our city, you would accrue a monthly PTO of 12 hours. Annually is 18 days, 144 hours. But then when you look at the vacation and sick, the Plan 1 and Plan 2, they receive vacation and sick leave. So you see they're accruing 8 hours of vacation, 8 hours of sick, a total of 192 hours, but half of that, 12 days, is sick leave, okay? And the 12 days of sick leave a year does not change throughout the career. It does not graduate, okay? It's always 12 days a year. All right, so probably one of the things that people hate when they're changing jobs is that they're going to have to start off at the bottom of the leave accrual. So we wanted to look at what can we do with our leave accrual if this is something that City Council wanted to entertain. So what we were thinking is that we could basically eliminate that first tier. And then we could slightly increase the accrual of the remaining tiers. And it would end up looking like this. So instead of the 12 hours to start, they would start at where the 5 years to 10 years goes, and it would, instead of being 14 hours, it would be 15. All right, so that basically eliminates that bottom tier and slightly increases the lead. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that there is a gap, and you can see that gap between the total number of hours that Plan 1 and 2 earn in comparison to the hybrids. There needs to be a gap because, again, the hybrid employees have that short-term disability. So there needs to be a gap between what Plan 1 and Plan 2 earn and what the hybrids earn. Under the proposed policy, the gap is lessened. It goes from 6 days of a difference to 4.5 days of a difference, but there is still that significant gap there. All right, and also because that first tier now would have a 10-year duration, the thought is we could address that by adding 1 flex day at year 3. The first 5 years are when we experience the most turnover of our employees, and year 3, for some reason, is the year, okay? So we were thinking we could implement that additional flex day so that, you know, they have something to look forward to, and it may end up being something that can encourage them to stay with us. So if we implemented this, it would help our hybrid employees because they are concerned that, yes, we do have the short-term disability, but short-term disability doesn't kick in right away. and we need to be able to have leave that gets us to that short-term disability. It also addresses some of the competitiveness because our PTO accrual is behind the City of Newport News, and it's also behind HRSD more significantly, but for this purpose, it's behind the City of Newport News. And I'm going to go a little bit off track because we are also behind on our holidays. So many of our surrounding cities follow the state holiday schedule. The state holiday schedule provides 3.5 more holidays than the City of Virginia Beach. However, we provide 3 flex days currently. So we are making up for 3 of those additional holidays that the state and some of our surrounding cities receive. So we're a half day in holidays behind. By adding that additional flex day at year 3, we are taking care of that half day, and we are also becoming more competitive and actually more equal with the City of Newport News. We're just getting to it differently. So again, this is something that if City Council wants to us to consider, then we can continue to flesh this out. But if that's not where we want to go, we can look at some other options. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to bring forth is the referral program. We used to have a referral program where if employees encouraged someone to apply for our city job and they were selected for the job, they would receive a monetary reward. The prior program, I think, was a little bit more too difficult for the employees to have it resonate. It was based on a percentage. So this time we're saying, let's just base it on a flat amount. We're saying 1,000 here. And half of it would be given upon hire of that candidate that they encourage to apply, and the other half would be given if that candidate stays on board for 6 months. And right now we're thinking that we would apply it to any referral. In the future, we may say we want it only for hard to fill, or we may stop the program, however it works out for us. We're estimating this cost to be about $160,000 just based on the hires. We think that our employees can help us, by getting that word out about the positions. And if they get the word out and we are able to enlarge our applicant pool, we may have more success in filling the vacancies. All right, so really quickly, I just wanted to point out a few other things that we are doing that I wanted you to be aware of. One is we're expanding the use of SkillBridge. And if you're not familiar with SkillBridge, that is an opportunity for those in the military who are transitioning out of the military to get experience with the private sector or civilian workforce. So during their last 180 days of their military time, they will work with an organization to get experience, no cost to the city. It is paid by the military, and we'll be working with our departments to set up internship programs that would be beneficial for them. I also wanted to mention the cultural survey. Because we can do whatever we want to do with pay and benefits. Culture eats it all for lunch. So Human Resources initiated a cultural survey with the assistance of the Inclusion and Diversity Council at least a year ago. The Office of Performance and Accountability is working with departments now to look at the survey results and make some suggestions for things that they can do. And I also wanted you to be aware that we are sponsoring an in-person job fair on October 11th at the Convention Center. A lot of the in-person job fairs stopped during COVID. We now think we can go ahead and have a successful in-person job fair. And then we're going to follow that up with some virtual job fairs as well. All right, so at this point, we're asking City Council, what is your will? Again, we're making process changes, we're making practice changes. These are some other things that could be done if this is how you want us to proceed.
Thank you. Aaron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have 4 quick questions, so you can feel free to give me a short answer.
Okay.
Like, my first question is, and maybe I'm just not abreast to this, but what's the difference between overtime and shift differential?
So overtime is required for certain employees if they go over 40 hours of work in a work week, okay? So it doesn't matter when the hours are worked, if they're going over 40, we have to pay them that time and a half,
So they wouldn't qualify for shift
That
differential
does
if
not-
they get overtime?
right? No, shift differential is separate. Shift differential is saying that your hours when you work will matter.
Okay,
So if you are working, if your shift begins between 4 p.m.
all right.
to 8, you will automatically get a differential for those hours, added pay for those hours. Overtime, you don't get extra pay unless you exceed 40 hours in
Okay,
your
so
work
you
day.
could be in a shift differential hours, and then if you work beyond those hours, you
You can
qualify for
still,
overtime.
yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think those were in. Also, as far as policies, you labeled or signified a lot of different areas of interest as far as retainment, recruiting, looking at positions, wages, and things like that. Have we looked at the work environment as far as something to incentivize or making sure we can attract workers? And if so, what are we doing? I know the Hiller Hines had a lot of different recommendations that they had in that report. So what are we doing to look at the work environment to attract and retain workers?
So there is a committee that works to make sure that we have gone through the Hillard Hines recommendations, and we have, for example, there was a recommendation that we establish a threat assessment team. That has been done. So we have gone through the Hillard Hines report and made sure that we are implementing what we can and what makes sense for our organization to implement. But what we are also doing is the cultural survey that I mentioned. The cultural survey is specifically to look at our work environment and ask the employees to let us know what some of the concerns are. And so we are, OPA is now working through the analysis of that and working with the departments to say, okay, this seems to be a concern within your department. What can we do to address the employee concerns?
Okay, thank you. And my last one is, I've heard from a lot of the employees that there's a real support to have holiday days off mimic the state, simply because a lot of employees have children that are in schools, but they have to go to work, but the kids may be out, they have to find a babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but also just the other surrounding cities may, be off, and our workers are the only cities that are working around in the region, which is an issue as well. And so I think I would like for us to try to mimic, and see if we can mimic state the 3 days, those 3 days that the state after their holidays, so those days off for our employees. And I think that would go extremely a long way.
Certainly. And again, we do have the 3 flex days, so the employees could take their flex days and use that for the holiday that we don't receive
But that creates tension as employees saying, hey, the state has this day off, but the city wants to make us use a flex day to have a day off that everyone else has off. That seems, unfair, from my point of view. And so I think if we have to, I guess, be flexible with our flex days, so to speak. That's one way of looking at it. But I think it will really be helpful, especially for our employees, to have some kind of consistency as far as that consistency with the state. They have those days off. We have those days off as well.
Okay.
We'll put something together. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, John, Delcino, Barbara, and Sabrina.
Well, I pushed a lot of questions to the city manager when I first got this brief, so I'm not going to cover those here. And I don't think we have enough time, unless we're going to take the time and push everything off the plate, to give this thing the discussion it needs and understand both the acute issues versus the structural issues versus the long-term structural cost of these adoptions, and who's going to be pushing raising taxes to pay for them, or who's going to find vertical cuts in the existing baseline budget to pay for it. Only because the recent report just came out from the state. Virginia Beach is, among other localities, above average fiscal stress. We just talked about these families. They don't get any of these kind of holidays, I can assure you, but that's for another day. But I do think, Mr. Mayor, this deserves, because of the cost implications, a discussion when we can really have all that on our plate. This has some of the same kind of cost efficiencies as that school board proposal that came forward, and it needs some serious vetting. But you did mention, I worked for civil service for 42 years, and I never paid cost differential of people who worked after 4 p.m. Was that a wage grade only?
Yes, they had two different, you talking about the OPM that I
Yes, you
mentioned?
mentioned Office of Personnel
Yes.
Management, which I'm very familiar with.
Yes, and they had two different schedules that they, and I don't know which positions they applied it to, but they did have a 7.5% option and a 10%
I
option.
think if you'll check, you find out that's for the wage grades for industrial employment, and it's not for the general scheduled professional workforce. I just thought that was interesting. Could you go to slide 16?
Wow.
Now, we went to a step system. I know a lot of people said, well, that's what the federal government has. Well, I'm very familiar with that system after 42 years. So when someone gets promoted 2 steps, which I assume that's what you mean, that 2 pay bands, right? Well, you get if you're not at the first starting point of salary on that band that you start, you go say you're a 50 and you go to a 52, and you're at 50 at the start, you go to 52 at the start. That's a big percentage difference. If you're further along, they go over on your step plan 2 steps and come find out which pay system is greater than but not less than where that is on that step you started from. So if you're at 50 step 1, you go to 50 step 2, and then you go down and say, is 50 step 2 less than 52 step 1? That's where you're at. So it's about a 6% pay raise in general. That's a standard. So I'm surprised that we're not defining, rather than having this more complicated system, and it isn't until you get to about the mid-grade where your full performance, as you could think about it, full performance of that you really are moving further than step 1 on the thing you got promoted to. It's been going on since after World War II. It apparently has worked. So I'm just kind of interested that we don't have some relationship, because that both reflects, if you get promoted quickly, that's a good deal. You get a big percentage increase because you're taking on what? Supposedly being accountable for more risk taking, and at will, you're more at will of not being working there. So I guess you get paid for that. So I'm just kind of surprised we didn't do that. For proposed changes on the right-hand side about hiring, here's what we have to watch out for, because I've seen this happen. If you don't control the people making those decisions, that they're still living within their baseline pay for their total department, what you see these people making individual decisions, and when it comes time for Kevin's turn, he's got his baseline started off at, say, 100, making that as the index, and now because of decisions made, which he now has to annualize, that index is 107, because the people along the way were making pay decisions to pay people more, but they weren't doing it in the context of having to keep whole within the baseline of their budget, which would be like managing the payroll. So you have to consciously know that you're not incentivizing people just to grow the baseline, because if you're hiring these more experienced people, which is why you're paying them more money, you should be getting more productivity. So you have to watch out. Do you have a system that allows you to control, which private sectors do as well, because they want their payroll to be a percentage of their total resources, no matter how much they're paying people? Where do you instill that control mechanism that people, by making individual choices, are not being held accountable for the baseline change? Someone has to be controlling total labor costs to maintain the soundness of the business, and not indirectly causing tax increases that no one saw coming, but are the incremental effect of a lot of micro decisions. I think that's a concern. You need to be watching out for that. Can you go to slide 15? I think leave accrual. These are things you got to talk about also, because
Yes,
we had this kind of system for a while, when we were bringing people in from the military into civil service, and we're letting, delegating that quite a bit down and not getting the top level review. Next thing you know, everybody's being hired at the 8th step, given a max leave, and just a distorted system happened very quickly. So you're gonna have to really think about how that's structured and how that gets, because people are incentivized to do unusual things when there's no oversight. And my last comment, Mr. Mayor, because I know we got limited time, is dealing, when we're looking at people retiring, right? And if you think about that 30 years, you're getting, I think I calculated you get 51% of your high three or high, I guess it's high three. And then Social Security basically replaces 26.5% of your income, roughly speaking. It varies by different people. So that's 76.5. So if you retired, you probably thought you weren't going to work 3 more years. I think we need to look at our workforce working back. How many people, because of the major adjustments we made in our pay structure, decided to stay 3 more years? So if we looked out thinking we're in good shape, but if you looked at year 4, you got this moving bubble and you've got this huge loss. So I think we really need to be looking, Mr. Manager, at that demographic and understanding that, because those incentives are great when you look at those paybacks, and everybody does those calculations. So and I'm sure that enters into, especially could happen in public safety, because in the 80s, you remember that, no, Barbara, we hired a lot of police officers every year, about 50 a year for a number of years there, and they could be in that window, and then of course they can go earlier, but that pay, I think we just need to be mindful that we may be giving ourselves a pat when we've just bought people to stay 3 more years and then we got a big hit. So I have other questions, but for another time. I appreciate the data, but this needs a lot more homework and understanding about human psychology and our workforce and how, and the cost implications. I think they're significantly understated. And I think we need to, since we are above stress physical locality, by the states even seeing it, so do those, we got to make sure that our citizens can afford this. I suspect very few businesses can have, on top of leave and holidays, only get 10 and a half months of productive work out of their employees and stay in business, but yet we're asking them to pay for that. We need to be mindful of other ways to get there, because when they're not there, no work's getting performed. Maybe we need to be looking at paying people to be at work more rather than paying them the same and having them off work. I mean, because in the end, it's the mission that has to get done. And are we going to have enough mission productive days to do the job? And that's one of the questions that I ask. How many productive days do we get per employee under this plan? And do we end up having to hire people just because of the leave we're granting? That doesn't seem to make sense. But anyway, thank you very much.
It was it Delcino and Barbara?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. Of course, you had me at marketing. When you say you want to do more marketing, is that, what does that look like? More than just putting out more content? Are we being more strategic in terms of our messaging? Partnering with professional organizations to try to leverage their pipelines and that sort of thing. And then I heard you mention apprenticeship for those who are in their reentry, but are we offering those opportunities and internships for that next gen professional? And then to Mr. Ross's point about there's some generational work habits. And so the younger generation may not have that same job loyalty as our grandparents and even our generation. So what are we doing? We have one here. But what sort of things do you have in place, or maybe that's on your not yet addressed list yet, to enhance that job loyalty? Because you have a generation now, I forget what the number is, the average number of jobs they're going to have in their career. The gold watch in 40 years, that's over, that's dead. So what are we doing what are some best practices out there that we can implement that to incentivize the next generation?
So can I respond to so with the marketing, we do have marketing campaigns with Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of those out there. What we are trying to do now is to enhance that by growing the campaign, making sure that we are hitting the different markets, whatever we can hit. Our communications office is coming into play with this, and they are going to make sure that we are also hitting where we need to hit. Do we need to do more radio? Do we need to hit TV? What do we need to do that we aren't doing? So yes, that is the focus of Human Resources in conjunction with the Communications Office. Now, we've just started on that to make sure of what we needed to do with the next campaign. We also are changing, I don't want to say the branding, but changing the campaign itself so that the campaign, it appears to have been effective, but we want to keep it fresh. We want to make sure that we're attracting various generations. And so we're going to do a totally new campaign, as well as make sure that we are hitting the various markets as we need to. So we're relying on communications to help us with that process. With the internships, yes, we do have, and our departments already have some internships for college students and that sort of thing. We are enhancing that program. That is something that OPA is working on currently, is enhancing the internship program that we currently have as well. So I wanted to just make sure. And the job loyalty that you spoke to, that is critical. You're right. It's not the days of someone staying in this organization to get to the 30 or 33 or whatever. I'm not saying they're gone, but they're not the norm. So what you do want to make sure of is, that's why I always speak to the meeting the employees where they are as far as the benefits are concerned. If we're not offering things that mean anything to them, they have no incentive to stay with us. So we have to have that variety out there so that we're meeting them where they are and they look at us. We want to have benefits that stand out. There aren't many localities that you can find that offer maternity leave. That's not common. So that makes us stand out. So we're looking at things like that. But again, as I said, if your culture is not right, it won't matter. So we need to make sure that if there are things that we are aware of, or if there are things that employees are making us aware of that need to be addressed within departments or within the city, that we take the time to find out what they are and address those, and that's going on now.
I just want to make sure there's not a delta between what the current employee wants and what that future employee is going to want. So talking to that 20-year plus middle-aged employee may not match with what the 25 to 30-year-old may want. So I just want to make sure that there's a match between what you're hearing and what the real need is.
Totally agree.
So we do,
Yes.
we do engage our employees on several fronts. One of them is the member advisory committee. I think it's about 40, 50 members.
Yes.
With very different time and duration with the city. Some have been here for 30, 40 years. Some have been here for 2 or 3 years. And we use that as a group to kind of vet different ideas, different policies, and different feedback on what they expect from the workforce. And then we vet that through different, through either my office or sometimes through OPA to get a sense of, can we apply some of the things that they want to do.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Barbara, Rosemary.
Just real quickly,
And
I'm
Spring.
assuming that there's going to be more discussion on any of these before anything is adopted, so we get feedback and we're able to look. But I hope we're looking at what's being done regionally to make sure that we're in good competition with everybody. And we're, if we're gonna be retaining our people, we don't want to be at the bottom of the list as far as the value of a particular benefit. But on the holidays, that's one where I'm not upset if we're not taking all the holidays that other cities are, because the flex days are allowed. And it's important to remember that if we shut down the city to take a holiday, the private industry probably isn't taking that day off. And it causes these businesses who need to do business with the city not to be able to get a lot done that day. So I think it's very important that we make sure that we don't just take a holiday because somebody else is. And allowing these flex days would allow anybody that wanted that holiday to take that day off. So I think the flex day is very good, and I think we have to really be concerned about our private industries when we're offering our services, and when we shut down, that means they're not able to work maybe if they need a permit or something. So that's an important consideration.
Okay, Rosemary and Sabrina.
Thank you. Thank you for this very thorough report, and I think our numbers are not as bad as maybe we thought they were when you could do that 5-year look back. And Barbara, I'm glad you mentioned looking regionally, because I'd like to see how we're doing with the other cities. I think the referral program is a great idea because people, they have incentive to get their buddy to come to work where they are. That's a good thing too. And that's also good for morale to have friends around you that you like and want to be with. So I think that's a really good thing. What has been the feedback since we did our compensation plan with the budget this year? Because I would think, I'm hoping this has really made a difference.
I think we've heard a lot of positives. We've heard, a lot of gratitude from the employees for the increases that they were able to receive. We had to do a lot of explaining and kudos to the staff of staffing and compensation. That's a division in human resources, because that staff went out to those departments and explained the system and how it was going to impact that department specifically. So we wanted to make sure that there was a good understanding of the new pay system, and they took the time to make sure that that happened. So we have had some good feedback from that. We've had some concerns from some because there's a concern that we are awarding tenure, and it may be at the expense of expertise, or that someone who has been, because if you remember, the decision was made that we would implement based on overall city time, right? Not time title or anything else, just the overall city time. So if someone had been with the city in, let's say, in one position for 10 years and then maybe moved to a higher level position a year ago, their total time was 11 years. So they were placed as an 11-year employee in their current title, if that makes sense. So there was some concern that, some employees who had been paid higher before were no longer paid higher than another employee, and that was because that other employee had overall more city time. So that concern has been raised. We've explained that this is how this system that has been put into place works, and we made sure that they had that understanding so that they would know going forward that that's how it worked. But so yes, we've had a lot of good comments about that, a lot of appreciation. We have drilled home that the city council allotted $32.8 million for this pay system, which is the most that I think we have allotted for pay in 1 year. And we have really pushed that thought down so that our employees can appreciate the stand that city council took on addressing pay. So I think that has been very much appreciated.
I also think a lot of staff appreciated the $15 an hour increase as well.
Yes.
That was big. That was really important as well. And one thing. This it's kind of an out of the box thought, but we had a citizen that offered. It has property, Virginia Beach Boulevard, right near the town center, and offered us we could use it as a recruiting office. And I know we do a lot of things online, but I think having a presence with a big sign, lots of people driving by, people that may not be looking online might think, oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about the city. And to have a presence there to help with this shortage, I don't think it's a bad idea for us to consider. And the citizen offered to give it to us rent free for a while, for at least a year or maybe longer, to help us get maybe where we need to do. But having a presence at a place that's really, really busy like that with lots of traffic, it might trigger some people, and then they can just stop and walk in and talk and have a real person to talk to, not just something online. And you have a desk and counter, and people can come up and talk to you about working for the city. So I'd really like us to look into that. Thank you.
Okay. And depending on where exactly it is, it may be a place that we can hold a job fair.
I
Depending.
don't think it's that big,
Okay, okay.
but it's close to Princeton High School. and Maybe you could have one right at Princeton High School.
And if any of you are interested in having something on your car or maybe a vehicle, we do have some placards that advertise the city of Virginia Beach that we're hiring as well. So.
Great, Sabrina?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I talked with a young lady not too long ago, and she asked me a question about the website in terms of employment, and I didn't have the answer, and I wanted to get some insight. She asked me why, since we have so many vacancies, why the website doesn't reflect that. And as I look on the website, it says search openings, search all Virginia Beach openings by clicking 164 comes up, positions open. So that's what she was asking me about. But when I look at vacancies in our presentations, I see over 800, 897 since July 31st. So I guess the perception there, I'm not sure if these numbers are supposed to be reflected here. I'm not sure what's going on, but people are going on to the website and they're applying. They're not seeing the great need that's being cast out there. So there is a bit of a disconnect to say, but does the city really need our services? And if so, why don't we see that reflected here?
Right.
I'll start.
Okay.
So Councilman Wooten, some of the vacancies that we advertise, they may be for one or more positions. So like sometimes you look at our 911 call takers, they may be recruiting for a class of 10, 13, 14, 15, or 20 or 30 employees to come apply for that one link versus having 30 or 50 different links for a specific position. And then sometimes some positions are just in a different queue of vacancies. So for example, we're onboarding 145 new employees now, right? That may still be a vacancy somewhere where we're still in the process of closing out, or other maybe still be in the queue of becoming requisitions for staff to actually hire on as well.
What does this number reflect? 164.
It probably reflects the number of employees, the positions that are out right now that are being advertised.
Okay.
But like I said, it could also be like for example, the police department may have one in there, and they may need 9 positions for that program, or they may need 45 recruits, or the fire department may be doing that as well. EMS, they were doing paramedics, they were looking for council authorized, I think 17, they had 17 on that one link. So it could be 164 times 17 or something,
So it is or it's not accurate?
It's a number of jobs that we have out, but it could mean more than one positions out there. So it varies. So 164 could actually mean 300 or something jobs that are currently being advertised.
So is there a way to communicate that better to the public when they come to this website and they understand we have a great need and there's openings available, but when they look, they're not seeing that? And that's a serious question that was posed to me, and I think we should address it. And I did tell the resident that I would bring it up. The other, I guess it's a comment. I'm not sure what the feedback is that you hear now, but I remember hearing in time past that it was difficult to be hired by the city. It's almost like, Fort Knox. You just couldn't get hired. And these are really professional folks, great resumes, great education, great experience, but they couldn't get hired. And so now that we have, this, sense of urgency and great openings for individuals, I'm just wondering, have you heard any feedback about that now? Because I'm hearing various responses, but in saying that, when we consider what the feedback is now, and saying that, we also need to make sure that and again, this is the perception that I'm hearing because I don't know what goes on in HR. But if that was happening and people have that sense that it's that difficult, are we changing some of those barriers, hurdles, bottlenecks that cause people to feel like they can't get in? Because if not, all of this extra work, money, marketing you're putting into it won't mean anything if you're not addressing that issue. So I just kind of caution that if we're really not breaking down those barriers and that keep people from gaining access, there's no use to do all these other things because you're not addressing the problem. So that's just feedback that I've heard that I hope that will be taken into consideration going forward, because we do have that great need, but we want to make sure we're making things accessible for individuals. And I know there's some things that have been changed. I did hear that, but I'm just wondering, is it making that connection? And if there's any positive feedback on things that have changed from what I've heard in the past.
I would say that I used to hear that as well. I heard that a lot, that you couldn't get into the city, and that we only promoted from within and that sort of thing. Yes, there have been some things. One thing I will point out is that HR does not make the hiring decisions. So those hiring decisions are made by the departments. What we try to do is to make sure that when the departments make their hiring decisions, they are doing that based on sound practice. That's what HR oversees. So for example, it used to be that it was okay for a hiring manager to have a one-on-one interview and make that decision solo. Just that one manager making that hiring decision. About 2 years ago or so, we implemented a policy that said you had to have a panel, and that panel had to be diverse, so that we would move away from this one person making that solo hiring decision. That's an example of one of the things that has been put into place to try to make sure that, we are giving due consideration to the applicants when they're coming through and they're being considered for positions. So yes, we do try to make sure that when someone is making those hiring decisions, that they're doing it based on sound practices. And I don't hear that as much as I used to, but I used to hear that a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Linwood.
Mary, just to wrap it up, this is a work in progress, and but hopefully we can get some additional solutions to the council sooner than later, because this was our top priority, the budget, getting our workforce back. I tell the Process Improvement Committee and anybody who comes before it that we expect some measurable increases in employment due to this, and we're going to be monitoring that. So the sooner we come to an agreement on the proper additional changes necessary to help incent, and I know lots going on. Mr. Chaparro's here and has been a great member of the committee from staff, but Process Improvement is working on this. The city manager and his staff is working on it. This is a high priority issue for us, and hopefully we can adopt something sooner than later so we can start measuring tangible results.
And thanks for your initiative.
It's your committee, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
yes,
So since we are beyond the time that we have on the agenda, if you desire, we can pause some of these things and bring them back on another agenda.
Yeah.
The one I would say that we bring forward to council is probably the pending planning items, because are these for the next voting meeting? Bobby here? Bobby's not. You get Bobby's not. We can probably give you a briefing of your pending planning items.
yeah, does anybody just want to defer the next two items and,
They are due for September sixth.
yeah,
Yep, we got them.
yeah, let's go to planning and then, we can get into executive.
So Michael and LJ, we'll come back to you all next time.
Starting earlier on the 6th.
I hope.
I'd get further behind.
No, but I think, a couple of the items that we had that took longer, deserve the attention.
Oh, they did, I agree with
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, absolutely. But I'd be willing to start at noon on the 6th, if that helped us not get further behind and catch up.
Or we can come back next week. Just kidding.
That's true. Don't offer something you're not gonna take.
I know I am ready.
Michael, I hope you enjoy it. I'm gonna give you the gavel, how's that? All right, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Okie dokie.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, I'm Carolyn Smith, and Bobby Tahan and I are here to give you a quick overview of the planning items scheduled for September 6th as well as September 20th. There are 10 applications scheduled for your public hearing on September 6th. Oh, I need the. Yeah. Items 1 and 2 are actually coming back to you, as the applicant's representative identified an error in both the application as well as the proffer agreement. So in order to rectify that, it needs to come through the process again. City Council approved these identical requests in June of this year. And to refresh your memory, this is a request to amend proffers that were approved in 2015, and also for a conditional use permit to operate an auto repair garage near the intersection of Dam Neck Road and Holland Road. The modification is necessary in order to develop the site with a smaller layout and a smaller building. The use is consistent with the ACUs, with the noise zone, as well as with other auto-related uses in close proximity. The applicant has developed other properties in the vicinity that are auto-related, and they are all high quality with attractive upgraded exteriors. There is no known opposition, and this was a consent agenda for the Planning Commission. Item 3 is a request to rezone 6.23 acres along the North Landing River from conditional B2 to conditional AG2 agricultural district. The property was rezoned in 1997 from agricultural to B2 community business district in order to operate a marina with a small marina shop, a boat launch, and also some boat storage. As the marina use has been unsuccessful, the property owners now wish to rezone it back to the agricultural use. What's interesting about this request is that the site is within the 70 to 75 noise zones, where residential uses are not typically deemed compatible with naval flight operations. Most typical agricultural uses would be deemed compatible. However, in this instance, the construction of a single-family dwelling is not. The zoning ordinance states that an incompatible use, such as the dwelling in this noise zone, is only allowed if City Council determines that there is no other reasonable use of the land. It was the Planning Commission's determination that in this unique case, there is no other reasonable use of the property under the existing B2 zoning. Therefore, rezoning to AG2 is warranted and is acceptable. And the proffers do limit development on this site to just one single-family home. And the planning commission concurs that this is the lowest density reasonable. The applicant's representative did provide a petition of support of 8 signatures of property owners along West Landing Road who do favor the agricultural zoning over the existing commercial zoning. And the planning commission voted 8-2 to recommend. Item 4 is a request to rezone 12.41 acres of school board property. This is the former site of the Lincoln Elementary School, and then most recently, the Laskin Road Annex. The proposal is to rezone to conditional B4 for the redevelopment of the site with a mix of uses including retail, restaurant, office, and also up to 132 apartments with a resulting density of 11.96 units to the acre. This site is in the highest noise zone, which is at greater than 75 ACUs. However, redevelopment of the property will not result in an increase in the number of units over what could be permitted to be built as a matter of right under the existing zoning of A12 apartment district. The site is within the Hilltop Strategic Growth Area, and the proposal is generally consistent with the key design principles recommended in that SGA plan. That includes development of a mixed-use concept, pedestrian trail connections, the provision of structured parking, and also respect of the environmental conditions. God bless you. Deviations to the setbacks along both Laskin Road and Wynwood Drive are requested for the 6,000 square foot standalone restaurant that's proposed at that intersection. A reduction in number of parking spaces was reviewed by the zoning administrator and deemed acceptable, primarily based on the differing peak hours of usage of those parking spaces by the proposed users.
John?
I think it's important, and this is publicly discussed or briefed, maybe mentioned here, is because people know that we moved the school to somewhere else because of noise. I think the point that she made about the right of development, which the Navy agreement allowed for, that's probably worth reiteration when this is discussed publicly, so the public won't think that, oh, by the way, we're undermining our agreement with the Navy, because people are going to remember that we moved that school. So I think that's an important point to make for people watching it, so they won't say they'll draw the wrong conclusion. But thank you for pointing out that it was the by right use that agreement did protect. Thank you.
Thank you.
The proffered,
Yeah,
I'm
Barbara.
sorry, excuse me.
It's kind of ironic that this particular site that has how many units on it?
132.
132 would be considered okay in a noise zone, but there was some concern about the one unit down in West Landing. That's, I guess, the same noise level. So, I mean, I think probably the discussion at the planning commission where the staff had recommended denial over that one unit was based on concern about the high noise, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. So in that situation with the one house, that was not something one could build as a matter of right.
Okay.
And even though it's a very unique, interesting situation and just one house, when you look at it from black and white, we were compelled to recommend denial.
Yeah, but particularly since it had been, and all the other lots along there are one house, Pearl, I think the fact that the marina just didn't work, and that, I think the only reason that was granted before anyway was that the family had originally had a marina there, and so you just really have to know the background. But this gets a little, we certainly don't want to look like we're not concerned about the ACUs and the Navy, but I just thought it was ironic. 146 is okay, but one isn't.
Right.
just because of but I guess the finding that we say that there's no other reasonable use is put in there to allow us to have some understanding. Is that correct, do you think? Okay, thank you. 'Cause we don't want to make it look as if we're not upholding the agreements with the ACUs, but we do have to look beyond the
Right.
surface sometime and make sure we're not being unreasonable.
And so in any motion you would make, you would likely want to ensure that you use that language and have a discussion about that you do believe that there is no other reasonable use in that commercial zoning.
Thank you.
So, for sure. The proffered elevations depict a one-story restaurant in a standalone building, which is the elevation at the top. That's at the Wynwood Drive and Laskin Road intersection. The main building is depicted with a variety of heights, 4 to 6 stories, with the exterior of the structured parking wrapped with the proposed uses. And there was no known opposition, and this one was on the Planning Commission consent agenda.
So we're approving, we're voting on this because of the B4 mixed use, not because it's already zoned for apartments.
Correct, yes. To get that mixed use development, it needs that B4 zoning.
So that's the whole vote is on the mixed use,
Yes,
Yeah, and low
not on the
density,
apartments.
not E36.
Yeah, Josh?
I just want to confirm just for, this application is entirely consistent with what was been previously presented, right? There haven't been any changes in the scope of this project at all since we last saw it.
So there was an addition of the restaurant at the corner. Maybe that's what you were.
I think the
Referring to-
restaurant was there. And,
Restaurant was there last
In
time,
the illustration, I remember seeing it was a
there was
restaurant.
definitely a restaurant in the plan.
Yeah.
It may have moved it, but I'm asking a general question. It's not because I suspect there is any, but if there is, I think we just ought to point it out.
My understanding is it went from one restaurant to two restaurants, one within the mixed-use structure and the new standalone.
Okay.
Yes,
That's what I
yes.
thought.
All right.
Yeah.
That is accurate. There is an addition of possibly basically food and beverage hospitality space in the south.
Good. I'm all for it.
Thank you. It's certain more tax base.
Yes, but when we did that, did we make sure that the apartments, that their parking, if you look around the city, I don't care what we say about our parking standard at these new apartments, they're bleeding over into neighborhoods in every single location. And so are we having sufficient parking really for the apartments when we had another retail establishment?
The added retail establishment provides additional parking to satisfy their needs.
Well, I thought we gave someone a waiver from parking because we had other parking they could use. I heard you say that.
Correct.
So how much waiver did they get?
117 spaces.
117.
118 spaces. Based on the premise that when you leave your apartment and go to work at your office, there's another office worker coming and using your space while you're at work. So it's a combination of when the peak hours are available, or when each business has their peak hours of operation on this site. So they were able to demonstrate in their parking study that it would all work out.
Well, I'll save my discussion for when the vote comes. My reality doesn't match up with the simulation.
Item number 5 is an application for a conditional use permit for a communication tower on city-owned property. Specifically, this request is to add antennas to an existing 126-foot tall light pole at the U.S. Field Hockey Training Center at the Sportsplex. According to information provided by the applicant, T-Mobile customers do experience a weak signal during larger events, so additional antennas are expected to solve this problem. The city's information technology staff indicate that they do not expect any interference with 911 or other city communications. There's no known opposition, and this was a consent agenda item. Items 6 and 7 are requests to operate a tattoo parlor for both traditional tattooing as well as the application of permanent makeup, and also a body piercing establishment within a unit in the Oceana Crossing Shopping Center, which is just west of the General Booth Oceana Boulevard intersection and across from the commissary. The proposal includes renovation of the interior of the unit to accommodate up to 20 individual spaces for tattoo artists and in the shopping center's parking lot. Updates to the signage are the only exterior changes proposed, and this one also has no known opposition and was on the Planning Commission's consent agenda. Items 8 and 9 actually mirror the previous request to operate both a tattoo parlor and a body piercing establishment. This property is along Virginia Beach Boulevard, just east of Kings Grant Road. In this situation, the proposal includes the full renovation of an entire building for the accommodating of up to 20 tattoo artists and piercing specialists. The only exterior improvements include upgrades to the existing freestanding sign and building signage. Shared parking is proposed with two properties to the east of this site, as this property was actually developed in the 1970s and they have only 2 parking spaces that meet our current dimensional standards. The parking spaces that will be shared with the 2 parcels to the east do have excess parking spaces above their minimums. So we do believe there will be no adverse impacts to their tenants or to their customers. The Planning Commission placed this on the consent agenda as there was no known opposition. And the last application for September 6th is item number 10, which is also a conditional use permit for a tattoo parlor. This one in the Salem Crossing Shopping Center. The applicant proposes to occupy a unit within an existing salon and offer permanent makeup services. Only one tattoo artist is proposed to be on site at any time. No changes to the exterior of the building or to the signage. There's plenty of parking in this shopping center. There's no known opposition, and then this was a consent agenda as well. I've been there, it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Members of council, I'll be glimpsing the September 20th items for the planning items. Item number 1 is by Frank A. Zingles and James T. Kroll Esquire. This is a proposed street closure of a portion adjacent to an existing property. City Council approved a larger street closure along the majority of these properties last year, actually I believe in 2020. And this is one portion that was not closed at that point in time. This area is 750 square feet adjacent to that parcel. And typical conditions are recommended, as well as the condition that a drainage easement be recorded for potential stormwater use. There were no objections from the viewers that reviewed this, and this was on the Planning Commission's consent agenda. Item number 2 is Ocean Condominium Developers LLC at 404 34th Street for a modification of conditions of an existing non-conforming use or previously existing non-conforming use. Planning Commission recommended approval on a 9-0 vote with 1 abstention. The site was previously developed with 6 existing units and received approval from City Council for a modification of a non-conforming use to develop a 4-unit building on the site. On the screen is the previously approved plan that was provided. And the property is located in the Sea Pine Station Voluntary Guidelines area that was adopted in 2017. The applicant is proposing to build 2 duplexes to maintain the same existing 4 units by modifying their essentially their development plan. There will be no increase in the previously approved number of units, and it does meet the key elements and recommendations of the Sea Pine Station Voluntary Design Guidelines. There is a request for a deviation of 2.5 feet 10 inches from the height to exceed the 30-foot height minimum due to existing heights in the area, showing that there are buildings on remnant sand dunes that exist already out in the neighboring properties. There were 3 letters of support from adjacent property owners, and there was 1 letter of support identified, but there was a concern for loss of mature trees in the development area. But again, this was previously approved for development by council, and there was no opposition. Item number 3 is by Dam Neck Associates LLC at 872 Dam Neck Road. Planning Commission recommended 10-0 to approve this request. The request is to modify the site layout and building design for a previously approved conditional rezoning by City Council in 1994 for this 40-plus acre site east of General Booth Boulevard and the Dam Neck Road intersection. The 1994 rezoning approved up to 612 multifamily units on the site. Following the approval, there was a survey provided that showed that there were additional environmental areas that were impacted, and the current application reflects that, showing those environmentally sensitive areas. The applicant is not proposing to increase the number of units. The applicant is only proposing to change the form of the development, changing to a different consolidation of multifamily unit buildings. The proposal is to accommodate this through 2 development phases. Phase 1 will be on the eastern half of the parcel, consisting of 5 apartment buildings totaling 314 units, the proposed clubhouse, as well as the large stormwater management facility to accommodate the entire development. Phase 2 is proposed to consist of 4 apartment buildings totaling the balance of the units and the completion of the connection of Dam Neck Station Road between General Booth Boulevard and Dam Neck Road.
Isn't that ratio below the 1.7, which is actually what we say is the minimum? It says reduction to ratio of 1.5. Isn't our standard 1.7? I didn't vote for that either, but I think that's what we now use is 1.7 for apartments.
The reduction was provided. The applicant provided a parking study for this that was provided for review.
Yeah, I understand all that. I'd like to get a copy of that. I'm just telling you these parking studies that talk about what human behavior should be per their study and what parking reality is are 2 different things. And this is even taking us below 1.7. Those cars go somewhere. And if you want me to tour you around and show you some places where it doesn't work, I can give you the list. I'm just telling you, this is a problem. And so anyone can say something on paper, doesn't mean it's what human behavior is. And we don't have a tax on lack of parking spaces. And I think we are not taking a critical look at the reality.
The applicant is also proposing a deviation to the required front yard setbacks on Dam Neck Road due to the existing dedication for the access point. There is a slight deviation that's required for one of the locations of the proposed buildings. The proposed elevations depict a varied height of 3, 4, and 5 stories with materials consisting of high-quality fiber cement siding, stone veneer, and fiberglass shingles. There were 3 speakers in opposition at the Planning Commission public hearing who noted concerns related to increase in traffic volume and insufficient public outreach regarding the proposal.
That's one question. On the things that are 5-story, are they providing pillared underneath parking? Because that firewood treated wood only gets you to 4 stories. It doesn't get you to 5. So how are they getting 5 stories on their site?
I believe that, typically the building construction would allow for up to 5 stories utilizing wood frame construction if they protect it appropriately. So
Got that. I mean, I don't know whether it's commercial. I've got one going right in front of me every day.
Well, the standard had been, and they could have changed, I'd like to be educated on that, but the standard had been 4+1, which you see all over California, because they're doing concrete pillar for the first deck, parking underneath, and building stick construction above, which is what they did at Town Center as well, on that one corner. So I didn't realize that we're now fire treating wood to 5 stories. I'd like to be educated on that, please.
You can provide that information.
Barbara?
This property was rezoned in 1994,
Yes, ma'am.
and I was on the council at that time. I wonder, when in the world did I vote for this many years?
I didn't vote for you,
But
I was there.
this
This is McCluskey.
it was approved in 1994, but they're going to have to build to today's design standards for stormwater.
That is correct.
So
That-
they're-
that is why
they're going to be able to put all of those units still on this property, even with today's standards.
Yes, ma'am. They had to provide, because it's in the Southern Rivers watershed, they did provide a preliminary analysis. And that's why the stormwater management facility proposed is sized accordingly.
So that's going to be on an adjoining piece of property.
It's all under common ownership and utilized. They're planning to size it
Same
accordingly.
ownership, but
Yes,
I mean,
ma'am.
did that have some zoning on it? I mean, it must have been zoned something.
The other property to the west is zone B2. That was part of the original rezoning from 1994 as well.
Because I know it gets pretty low in there.
Yes, ma'am. They had a few back and forths with the Development Services Center staff to go over to make sure that this is the right sizing of the pond. There are some other development concerns that they'll have to work through, but this is sized appropriately.
So, this phase 1, does phase 2 include more so that they'll have the 600 units?
Yes, ma'am. So the proposal is to modify the condition, modify the proffers to allow for all the units to be developed. They are proposing phase 1, which is that first set of 300 plus units, and with phase 2 at a later date to finish the balance.
So they're not going to decrease the number of units?
No, ma'am. And they are not proposing to increase. They're not touching the number of units that were previously approved.
Barbara?
How about the ACUs? Are they having to do anything to satisfy the changed Navy situation out there since '94?
They will have to develop according to the noise attenuation that's required per the code.
Been a lot of changes in a lot of things since '94.
Yes, ma'am. They'll have to meet all the current standards, including building code and our stormwater management ordinance.
So we are changing rezoning part to residential and then part to commercial.
No, ma'am. We're only modifying the proffers. There is no proposed rezoning of any of the parcels. It's just to modify the proffers.
1994 page.
Yes, ma'am.
I think a good question, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
If I may. Thank you. We just talked about affordable housing. So what are this market rate housing? Is it affordable housing? Is it mixed income rate housing? What is this?
It's our understanding these are market rate units.
So do
That's accurate, we anticipate that everything we hear from this developers is market rate housing.
so are we not going to try and see if we can get some affordability in there, or?
We can have that conversation with the developer if you like, but important to note.
It's 612 units. So
Sure,
like units.
completely understand. We can certainly take that to the developer if you like. This is just what we would say about. I don't have a high degree of belief that we would be successful in that space, given the amount of time that it has taken the developer to get to this point as it relates to what was a very lengthy discussion with the Navy around and us around under sort of the prior city manager and my predecessor. But I'm happy to take that conversation to the development team and ask.
Yeah, I just think, when we have these conversations, so we just had one last week about another apartment unit with 100-some units, and we keep saying we need more affordable housing in the city, but from the very onset of these conversations, we're not putting this up front and saying, yes, 612 units, we like it, it looks good, but where's the affordability housing in it? I mean, either we're serious about having affordability or we're not.
Yes, sir, I'll take that to the, like I said, we'll take that back to the development team. In truth, I would take, going back to Councilmember Moss's comments from the last meeting, the cost of materials in the present probably do not give me a high likelihood of success, but I will have the conversation and report back.
Yeah, and I think obviously that's nothing new. I mean, we talked about the fact that, I mean, the cost of building affordable housing is just not there for developers, right?
Yes, sir.
So up to this body as well as the state level, what are we doing to incentivize or to fill that gap, and so we can have affordability? I mean, our first responders, our military, men and women, as well, our teachers and our staff. I mean, the oceanfront is right down the street from here. And
Yes,
so you're talking about, a place that's relatively close, and we keep building 612 units housing, but yet we're not, because we're saying, well, it's too expensive for developers. I get the issue. We understand the issue. I guess my point is, where are we solving the problem? Where are we finding a solution to make sure that when something like this comes before us, it looks good and it's going to help us solve the issue? But where are we looking at the affordability of it? We know the economy is in no greater shape than it was yesterday. So
yes. So I don't want to get ahead of my colleague Ken on this, because his team in Housing and Neighborhood Preservation is actually doing some research for you all on this issue specifically. But Councilmember Week, I hear you loud and clear on the need to come back with some information. We'll come back to you as quickly as we can.
Because it
And
can
I will
be
talk
done.
to the developer about this. Yes, sir.
It can be done. Our state has a huge surplus fund
Yes,
as well, where we can find ways to meet our developers out there in the for profit. We can find ways to fill that gap to get housing affordability throughout, especially our city, which values tourism, and you gotta have the staff, the workforce to go along with it.
Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Okay, so Brandon, John, and Michael.
Thank you. Your hand was next. I can defer to Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
I just have a quick remark. Thank you. I don't know whose hand was first, so.
I saw yours.
I think that Mr. Rouse brings up an interesting point, a good point about affordable housing. And what I've noticed from the particularly last few meetings, we're behind the curve here. What we're doing is we're talking about affordable housing when the opportunities around multifamily come up. And that's not fair to the applicant. It's not, but most importantly, it's not fair to the Virginia Beach residents who need more affordable housing. And so I think what we need to do, and I would just respectfully request, we need to have a strategy session around affordable housing. Hopefully a presentation from neighborhood preservation, housing and neighborhood preservation. Councilmember Miles talked about it last week during the application, the Broaden application in District 4. We're talking about it here. And I just don't think it's the best use of our time to talk about policy matters when it comes to specific applications. I mean, what they're pointing out, though, is that there's a gap in an obvious need. But we need to get in front of it, not behind it. And every conversation we're having about affordable housing is behind it. And so what I would think is we need to really drill down into this issue. We identify affordable housing every retreat as a top priority, and yet for some reason it's not elevating to the surface of our city council discourse. And so I would just think it's up to us to prioritize the discussion in a strategic policy direction way, rather than being behind the curve when we see multifamily applications come up and we ask about affordable housing. So that would be my request and observation. Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Wu.
Okay, Sabrina, John, and then Rosemary.
Thank you. Well, I'm certainly going to concur with the comments that I've heard regarding affordable housing, and certainly, again, Councilmember Miles brought it up last week. But what I was listening to and what I'm hearing is Mr. Adamson saying that he can go back to the developer and bring the conversation up. But pretty much at this point, they really can't do a whole lot because of the position they're in with the economy. So I guess my question or concern is, what can we do to weaponize him to go back to have a productive conversation to say, we understand where we are, but here's what the city's willing to do. Do we have any tools in our box to assist in that effort? Because sending Mr. Adams there without being properly, I guess, prepared to have this discussion, may not be very productive when what we're asking for is a solution and asking the developer to perform. So that's my question. But then, yeah, I certainly do think we need to put a serious plan, and it was mentioned a serious strategy behind this, because if not, we're just going to be talking about it at the next retreat like we normally do.
Okay.
So do we do, I'm sorry, that was for you, Mr. Dehaney.
I don't know to what extent. So I know we had this conversation with another council member last week, and Mark and I had a discussion. I don't know what extent Mark wants to provide.
Well, you're somewhat limited in requesting proffers of developers. And if you don't want to give the perception that you're requiring a proffer, because proffers have to be voluntary under Virginia law, and it can cause serious problems if an application is denied after you've made a formal request in writing, at least, for those proffers. So you have to be very careful about those discussions in the context of a conditional rezoning.
Well,
I'm sorry,
Councilmember, you can go.
No, I guess my thought then is, I guess, being forward thinking in the future, how do we structure or work towards that effort to be successful?
So we'll put together a Friday package and we'll explain some of the things that we are working on and bring forward to you all for future consideration. We've heard this. There was a study that council, I think, received before I got here from Virginia Tech that needs to be updated. I think we've engaged that research institution to get that updated. I don't remember the timeline that Ken and our housing director gave me, but we couldn't bring something forward to council that would give council a general updated sense, because it was post-COVID when we had pre-COVID when we had that. We can have some post-COVID updates on the data on that, and then also some updates on the research recommendations, and then we can have a deliberate conversation with council to figure out what they want to possibly tell us to do, so when we could be more in the forefront and more proactive with a policy that's adopted by this body on how we want to address this. I think if you recall, on the previous application, staff did request of the developer as part of the consideration, the CUP process, if they would consider affordable housing, but as a dialogue articulated last week, that wasn't possible as well. So staff is advocating for this. We understand it's one of your priorities, but we really need to have a deliberate conversation on what kind of box this council wants to say is okay for us to operate in and hold people liable towards.
Because I'm just in my last comment. Because what I see is a similarity, and I hate to bring that up, but I mean, I see the similarity in terms of the same thing with minority contracting. It's, can you consider? But I mean, that does not always provide the result you're looking for. They can consider it, but what does that mean? What is the tangible process behind that? What did you do to consider it? And is that consideration leading to results? I don't see that happening in a very measurable way that shows success. And so we may have to be a bit more aggressive in the way we address it. That's just my comment.
Okay, John, Rosemary, and Rocky.
I want to pick up a little bit on Michael's comments, because my thing is no one's listening to anything we say in this particular market, because we live in a capitalistic society, whether we like it or not. That's what we operate under. And if you're not bringing capital to the table, that gives them the same return that they're getting from their private investors, which are substantial, you are just at the table, but being patronized at best. And they're moving on because that's how our society works. And we may not like it, it has a lot of dysfunctional effects, but just mark your word that people that have had to try to influence this have had to come to the table with state issued bonds, brought real money, and now they're substituting taxpayers' money or credit or whatnot, capital, because people are going to go where the returns are and they're not going to invest in things that doesn't get them a return. And we should think it isn't. So whatever the solution is, if it doesn't bring capital to the table, and I don't know where we have the physical tools to do that, and military get tax-free housing allowance, I don't think they're necessarily being priced out of the housing market. In fact, those tax-free housing allowances escalate the market and make it less affordable for indigenous residents. But the challenge is going to be, and if you say density credits, once you go over it, I guess now 5 stories, you're talking structural steel or concrete, and your costs go to $800,000 a square foot. And short of, once again, public subsidies, you can't get it built. So the housing that we have is the cheapest housing. So how do we use the Virginia Beach Development Community Corporation to probably maybe more acquire homes that in some of these neighborhoods that are single family homes that are deteriorating, acquiring those homes and putting them back into the marketplace where our capital would go further, might be, that might be part of your strategy pitch, probably is a more executable strategy than trying to, I won't say broad, but to match the private sector returns for new construction. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Rosemary and Rocky.
So we have a housing advisory board, but it started out as the workforce housing advisory board. Because the workforce housing is what we're talking about. Nurses, bank tellers, police officers, teachers, the people that serve all of us, and we couldn't do without them. But yet they don't make a top floor salary. So it was put together to help with this issue, because if you work in Virginia Beach, you ought to be able to live in Virginia Beach. And there was a program put together that gave density credits if they would provide 5% of their project for workforce housing. And it had to look just like everything on the outside, but it could be different on the inside as the finishes and that sort of thing. And the very night we voted on that, there was an application that came forward that wanted to do this. And people came forward because they equated workforce housing with Section 8. They did not want. They said it was terrible. And it went down really badly. So a lot of this is not just what we want to do. We need to get the public to understand that this is the housing that we want. We want to be able to have these jobs, and for Taylor Adams to be able to go out and recruit, he's going to have to need places for people to live. Right? If they don't have places for their employees to live, it's going to be hard for them to come here with these new jobs. So we've really got to get rid of, as best we can, of the negative feelings of what people have when they hear this, and when they hear affordable or workforce or whatever it is that they hear. And so people need to know these are the people we want to have here. We want them to provide the services that we all need. We need these people. Talked about human resources and bringing in people. Well, those people need a place to live. So it's really important. We have an advisory board in place. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt what you were doing. Aren't you on the housing advisory board?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I brought these very same capital issues, and the Johnston group who's there commented that density, if you look at the density, because we've had 836, that in itself still going to market rates, because when you look at, and this is part of stormwater management, to do with our stormwater that can easily consume 24%.
So John is on this group. I think we're gonna try to get Delcina to be liaison. I'll step away while she's here, so she can be liaison to later.
It's a tough nut to crack.
It is a really tough nut to crack, but we've got to get past the public perception and what people really believe when they hear this. And they don't really understand what we know. And there's also some more information that we need to hear. There has been housing built with HUD money. Renaissance up there off of Wichita Road. Terry Franklin's group did that. And that is the more workforce housing. So there are a lot of units there that were built for that. So we really, when you bring this information forward, Bobby, and I know that the Housing Advisory Group has got a lot of this. There's also apartments that have been built with HUD money, Seaside down on Mediterranean 18th Street. That's another one that was built for that. So we need to know what those projects are. And I know we're hearing a lot of the market rate, but there have been
27th Street also, right on the ocean front.
Yeah,
That's a
so-
10% affordable unit.
Right,
Virginia
and we talked to
Housing
a
Authority.
developer who was thinking about coming and doing something here. Bobby and I met with him, and some of y'all have too, and they said they could probably do 10% of theirs. But you do need to encourage them on the front end. And they were gonna have 900 units, which, okay, 10% doesn't sound like that, but that would be 90 places for people to live. So if we're gonna do this, you just can't do it part of the way because we're gonna stay right where we are. We're not gonna get anywhere. Anyway,
Okay.
just.
All right, Rocky and Dulcina.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this problem is just not unique to our city by the sea. It's all over the Commonwealth. And last year, the General Assembly kicked this around quite a bit. In a quick Google search, I found House Bill 400. So there are some help in the legislature where other localities are doing this and getting some help out of Richmond. So I think it's worth digging into all those new law changes and see what we can get. And I have heard here in the city that some law enforcement officers have been given discounts at housing, and then they serve as security there on campus at the housing. So that's one of the ways that the managers have been trying to find ways to free this up, because I think they see the benefit of having a law enforcement officer living in your complex. But I certainly think there might be some answers in Richmond that came out of there. I know House Bill 400 came to mind quickly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Dulcina.
Real quickly, certainly there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to this, and certainly I want to dive in a little deeper, Madam Vice Mayor, to serve on the Housing Advisory Committee. I know, and I'll send this to the body, I saw a couple of articles that Fairfax as well as Roanoke have workforce housing initiatives that they're implementing, not thinking about or studying, that they're doing it. So there are some models out there, so I would respectfully ask that during this due diligence that we take a look at other localities that are getting it done. So, thank you.
Aaron, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just kind of put a bow on it really quick. I think what, I take away from this conversation is much needed is maybe a workshop one day soon. We can really sit down and talk about this, but I think the key is to be proactive in this endeavor to make sure affordable housing is not just a talking point, but it's actually something we're working towards. And again, I think, as everyone stated, it's really a tough nut to crack, but we can definitely get there once we put our heads together on it.
Good, and let me just close it out real quick. There's a couple interest groups right now looking at the tiny house program. Now, go on YouTube and see that they're building some homes, extremely affordable and livable, that are incredibly good starter homes. The challenge is finding the land for them, but there is a move afoot to find nice housing. And let me just say, years ago we went, Rosemary and I went to a thing called the Power Hampton Roads, and we went up to actually McLean, and we had they were reconfiguring McMansions into 4 separate units,
but instead of Formica, or instead of, marble countertops, you got Formica instead of teak countertops. But they're still and nice and livable. So there are solutions out there, as we're talking about infill and density, this is where we can do it. So at this point, let's go ahead and move on.
Mr. Mayor, the next item is for Atlantic Park. Actually, the next two items are for Atlantic Park. The first item is for a modification of conditions to their alternative compliance regarding the height of light fixtures in regards to the wave pool. This item will be heard at the September 14th Planning Commission hearing, and then will be heard by the council on September 20th. The applicant is proposing 4 light poles at the proposed height of 70 feet that are directed towards the wave garden or the surf park lagoon, and 1 light pole proposed at 60 feet. Again, all of these lights are focused and directed at the surf park lagoon for safety purposes. The applicant did provide a photometric lighting plan showing that the proposed lighting will be shielded appropriately, as well as reduce the lumens that will be projected off the property to be consistent with what's around it. The next item is for a major entertainment venue sign for Atlantic Park. They're proposing 2 major entertainment venue signs that are located here in the orange. Both will be visible from Pacific Avenue. Both signs are LED. One is 720 square foot, and it will be perpendicular to 20th Street on the building facade, and again, oriented towards Pacific Avenue. The other one on Pacific Avenue will be 390 square feet and LED as well. The proposed conditions are similar to those that are attached to the sports complex, to the sports center that's located at 17th and 19th Street for any proposed LED signage. Item number 6 is by Mike Daubert at 1833 Princess Anne Road for a conditional use permit for assembly use. Planning Commission is recommending approval of this request. The request is for an assembly use to operate a wedding/event venue on a portion of the Back Bay Farm. Vehicular access will be located from Indian River Road. Again, this property is located at the intersection of Indian River Road and Princess Anne Road. The applicant did provide a preliminary stormwater analysis or strategy showing that they can meet the requirements, and the Agricultural Advisory Commission and the TAITA CAC are supportive of the proposed request. 21 letters of support were received by staff, one which includes the property owner directly across Indian River Road, and there was no known opposition to this request as it was on the consent agenda of the Planning Commission.
Barbara?
Is this one still going to have the building on the site that they own, the parking area and access on another site that's leased?
They were still working through. They were still working through whether they were going to, which portion they were going to own versus what they were going to lease with the application. They do have the signature of the property owner to move forward with this application as is, but they're working on it.
Imagine that.
Yes.
But it's unusual for us to approve a use that's not all on the same site. And I just want to make sure that this has been thoroughly vetted with all of our legal folks to make sure that this is something that's going to stick no matter what. Because if we've got the building on one site and the parking and access and B&P on another site that's only leased, this is something we've not done before, I don't think. So I'm just saying, look at it legal wise and make sure it's right.
The property will be tied to this proposed layout. The applicant will have to comply with all the requirements of the zoning ordinance to meet their parking. And if they, for some reason, do not have access to that, then they would no longer be in compliance with their conditional use permit.
I'd be surprised if somebody can get a loan to build something and not have the ownership of the property. But anyway, that's for their legal people to please double check this and triple check it.
Make sure you understand what if bankruptcy occurred on the one parcel but not the other, what happens?
Items number 7 and 8 are by America Real Estate Company for a conditional use permit for truck and trailer rentals and a mini warehouse. Staff is recommending approval on the Planning Commission on a 10-0 vote. Also recommended approval. The proposal is for a conditional use permit for both a mini warehouse storage facility as well as a truck and trailer facility. 2 mini warehouse buildings are proposed, and they are proposing a median break along their access point of the road that is the access to the neighborhood. There are limited hours by customers. Typical hours of operation are from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And the side and rear buffer yards exceed the minimum requirements. This is a proposed U-Haul facility. Staff worked very diligently with the applicant to get a design that was a bit softer and fit in a little bit better with the neighborhood. Yes, sir. Due to the location of the entrance on the residential neighborhood, the applicant has agreed to simplify their colors to not be as intrusive on the neighborhood. And the applicant spoke with the adjacent neighbors and residents. Staff did receive 9 letters of support for this proposal, and there is no known opposition to the request. And this was on the consent agenda for the Planning Commission. Item number 9, tentatively scheduled for the September 20th City Council hearing, is an ordinance to amend sections 250 through 254 of the zoning ordinance to add lighting requirements. We do know that we will need to brief the City Council prior to bringing that forward. I only put this here as a placeholder for the council.
We don't have copies of that ordinance in this, and I would really like to have it because I've had a constituent that's been calling me to asking about it, and he called planning and nobody seemed to know. So if I could have these ordinance proposals quickly.
Yes, ma'am. We will have available to you the presentation that was given by the zoning administrator to the Planning Commission, as well as the proposed text that was recommended by the Planning Commission.
When can I get that? Can I get it this week?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I need it.
Scott?
Does that lighting presentation have illustrations?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. That's it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, moving on. Any council comments or initiatives, Barbara?
I just sort of need to tell you something, so there won't be any confusion. After one of our last elections, council passed a ordinance or policy that no city council member could have a public meeting on city property 90 days before an election. Y'all remember that? Well, I have my monthly forums, and normally I have them in Building 19. But because of that ordinance, and I just want everyone to be absolutely clear, I am going to be having my forum this week and also in October, September and October, just down the road at the Princess Anne Masonic Lodge. I'm personally paying the rent. It's not a campaign meeting. It's my forum. And just so that there are no questions and no rumors, it's not in a city building, and it's not a campaign event, and the rent is being paid out of my pocketbook.
Okay, great. Anybody else, John?
I know we are concerned about the appearance of town center. So I've had a running battle with Walmart on parking tractor trailers, leaving the trailers, no truck, they're days on end. And they've been cited numerous times, got fines. I even wrote a personal letter to the CEO of Walmart saying, would they tolerate the same kind of policy compliance from their employees or their trucks of their company? And for a while there was an improvement. I don't know who to owe that improvement to, but nonetheless, we're back at it. And this is, and I know the staff has been very good, but at some point, and I know they gotta get this notice again, but I'm happy to be on a phone call with whoever their VP is, our regional manager, but this is just flagrant. They got 4 trucks. I take pictures of them sitting there, and it's, we allow them to go other places. You may recall when we had that vote to have these out parcels where they could store stuff at the other Walmarts, but it didn't fit in with the scheme that we had for the town center, and it still doesn't. But when you go and look at this, right across from the fire station, it couldn't be more flagrant and repetitive. And I don't know what it takes or who we have to take or who we have to make come here and maybe do it, inconvenience them. But no one should be allowed to just flagrantly, repeatedly, having been noticed and fined, a folder, you can look at all the things in there. And just, there ought to be some way we can hold those people accountable. And I just asked the staff to figure out how we can make them feel the inconvenience of being a flagrant violator of our policies. It's not right. They're not a good community neighbor, as they say on TV. So that's just a burr in my saddle, but it just doesn't fit. They do it over and over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you all know, a few weeks ago, I came to this body asking to have a conversation with Mr. Williams, Referral Williams, who's a major partner in our dome site, and a major project for our city, historic project for our city, and trying to facilitate a relationship with him as well. And with the approval of this body, you appointed myself and Councilman Branch there to go and meet with Mr. Williams as well. We had a great conversation about moving our city forward, and that's what it was. And so hopefully we can continue to have further that conversation and keep that open dialogue going as well. So thank you for that. I just want to report on that. I know many of you have probably seen in the media already. Tons of speculation out there, but it's really just a great conversation and trying to build a relationship going forward. Aside from that, the other thing is I want to invite council out tomorrow to Friendship Village at 4 o'clock from 4 to 7. You all can stop in. As you know, this body helps support the installation of a basketball court and playground that the community never had. And even though the park and the playground, the park has been open now for about a week, the basketball court has been open since December of Christmas. This is the first grand opening of both installations. And so I know Chief Newtygate will be there as well with our men and women who serve our community. Teachers will be there. A couple other guests will be there. Michael Kirschman, Director Kirschman, will be there also, and really look forward to have council members.
What day?
Tomorrow from 4 to 7, and if you all can stop through, say hello. I know we mean a lot to the community, and we'll be giving away school supplies as well. And so I know the community is very, very appreciative of council support for helping them get that park and basketball court.
So you're gonna do some one-on-one with the kids?
Yeah, I mean, I ain't bringing my ball and shoes out there, so they're a little bit faster than I can keep up with. But again, the community is really eternally grateful for council support and getting that out there. And as soon as the playground went up last week, the little ones have stayed on it since it's been up. I mean, they're on it all day. So if you all have the opportunity, I know it's short notice, but it kind of came about just on Monday. It's something that this date was available, and so I know the community would love to see you all out there. Thank you. Jeff, 40.
Well, don't discuss any city business if there's going to be more than 2 of you there.
That's the first thing that went through my mind.
And Aaron, be assured your mayor will not demonstrate his gravity impairment.
Mr. Mayor, you were asked to attend. I know you have a busy schedule, Mr.
Yeah,
Mayor.
but I will be by.
Yes, sir.
I got a 3 o'clock presser, and
Yes,
then I'll
yes,
be
sir.
there. As you know, as I can tell by the way I'm dressed, we got the the event going on with this East Coast Surfing Championship. And for the first time ever, we have professionals out there. And this is a tribute towards the city, and then we're going to have an event coming up with a concert. I spoke to the city attorney over the last weekend. I was asked by a couple of the folks that were involved in this if I would, host an event that would bring forward a lot of people that have put this great event together. We didn't think it was fair to, impose on the city to throw a get together after, we made contributions. So like Mrs. Henley with their, we're kind of doing this on their own. I ran it through Mark, and I would like to invite all the city council people to, come. we're gonna be having the surfers gonna show up on, it's gonna be Thursday at the, Waterman's on the second floor. And, and I gave Mark assurances, this is not a political event. This is not a fundraiser in any way, shape, or form. This is a thank you for all the efforts of the people that came together that made this a very successful event. And, so once again, but the one thing Mark asked me to make sure that way when we're all congregating there, that three of you don't get together and be talking about city stuff.
Do not discuss any aspect of city government or city business, please.
And what he said, okay? But once again, I think this is an opportunity for us to get together too. Yeah, we're gonna have some very, very good people there. We're gonna have some of the members of our surfing community, our community at large that help make our community together. Representatives, Captain Holmes from Oceana is going to be there. I spoke to Captain Witherspoon from Fort Story today. This is an idea to get together for us to, as a community. Mr. Dehaney is going to become to miss and mingle with some of the folks that are the players in this community to put this event together. And, but once again, if I can highlight that this council has been, we went through some challenging times together over the last couple of years, and we came together and we came through COVID in a positive way. And, I understand members of the RAC have been invited by Mr. D and everybody. The hotels, the restaurants are going to be there. Let's get together with our community, and as our community on council combine, just get together. Okay, so that's once again Thursday from 6:30 to 8, and then 8 o'clock the concerts start. And we understand that some of the the professional surfers will be there, and as well as the performers are going to be there. So once again, tremendous opportunity, and if Mr. Rouse's announcement along with Linwood comes to fruition, I tell you what, we could have a very, very successful summer. Okay. Okay, at this point, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to cause this to be delayed, but I just need to make one quick council comment if we're still in that session. Because I extended some thanks and praise on the judicial security project at the courthouse, I need to make a follow-up because I've talked to some folks on the historic review panel who are feeling somewhat overlooked and abused because of the rush to get this done. And while I understand the rush, and I obviously I endorse the project in general, I'm well aware of it. The pace with which this was put together, given how long it's been that this has been a problem, I think may have surprised a lot of people. But I think I hope that their views will be sought and taken into account before this thing is finalized, because they certainly should be. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of money making sure that these districts that are recognized as historic districts do have standards, and I hope we will do everything we can to give full voice to the folks that we have put in charge of reviewing these and looking at them. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this point, if we could get into executive. The chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed session pursuant to the exemptions of the open meetings allowed by section 2.2, 3711A. Code of Virginia is amended for the following purposes: personnel matters, discussions, considerations, interviews, prospective candidates for employment, assignments, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation for specific public officers, appointees, employees, or section 2.3711A, special appointments, council boards, commissions, and agencies. Before I ask for a motion, Terry, did you have a quick announcement too? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. So just real quick, Amanda asked that I get just an initial response on everybody's availability for the proposed date of October 7th at 11 a.m. for the City Hall building dedication. That's the first Friday in October. So I'm just going to ask if you know that you're available, or if you know you're not available. If it's okay, I'll just go around the room, Mayor.
I'll tell you, why don't we have people check their calendars and, then get back respectively.
Okay, is there anybody that knows that they're not?
What's the date?
October 7th, the first Friday.
And the time?
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, all right, at this point, do we have a motion for close?
Second.
Okay, do we have to do a vote? Okay, Terry, if you could be so kind.
Councilmember Berlucci,
Aye.
Councilmember Branch,
He left the room.
What is this one?
Councilmember Holcomb,
Councilmember
Henley.
Aye. HE comes before HO. That's the second time.
Councilmember Miles,
Aye.
Councilmember Moss,
Aye.
Teacher.
Councilmember Tower,
Aye.
QR.
Councilmember Rouse,
T before R.
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten,
Aye.
She's like.
Vice Mayor Wilson.
Aye.
Mayor Dyer.
Aye.
By a vote of 10 to 0, you voted to go into
Anyway,
closed
we're
session.
gonna recess into executive, how about a quick break before we get going? Closed session.
So moved. Second.
We have a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
I think it's recorded.
Hang on, we're gonna do a,
She's got
is it unanimous?
Yes.
We're adjourned.
I think it has to be recorded.
Aye.
Councilmember Branch.
Aye.
Councilmember Henley.
Aye.
Councilmember Holcomb.
Aye.
Councilmember Miles.
Aye.
Councilmember Moss.
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse. Councilmember Tower.
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilson.
Aye.
And Mayor Dyer.
Aye.
By a vote of 9 to 0, you approve.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Good.